ladies and gentlemen. This is hopefully one of irregular occurrences, if I can remember. But maybe I'll do it once every few months instead of once every month. This is my monthly Patreon Q&A, and I release it to the public so people can know what my beautiful patrons have asked of me, and also to incentivize you to go to patreon.com/joinartproductions to keep the content renaissance alive. But anyways, please listen to this video. It's amazing. Well, I hope so. I've been asked a lot of amazing questions by my fans. Not too many goofy ones, but you know, it's better to keep it exclusive, because if you pay for the full episodes of Content Minded, you pay for the Jenna review series. By the way, at the time of this recording, I have just uploaded the first video of my Byung-Chul Han's, the review of Byung-Chul Han's newest book, Infocracy. And I believe next week I will... You know what? I think I'm going to do more of a theory cell text. I'm up in the air whether it's going to be... but keeping with something that isn't like pure theory, something that is art analysis. I had this theory that, you know, one day, if I'm confident enough, I could do the Red Book. But, you know, maybe I'll release half of it to the public and the other half to Patreon. Because I feel like to cover the whole book cover to cover is very important. But I'm debating whether I should do... I want to do shorter articles as well, like I did the article Why the Future Doesn't Need Us in Wired Magazine. And I wonder if any of you have older, like Kino and Nectar editions of Wired Magazine that you want to send me, we can arrange that. So DM me, either on Twitter or on my Patreon, or my email me, giantgeo@msn.com. If you have something Kino, if you want to send me books too, we can arrange that. Maybe, if you want to send me books to review. Lord knows I need more books. But I'm debating whether I should do The Aesthetic Education of Man by Schiller, or I could do Art After Metaphysics. I'll probably do Art After Metaphysics. I want to do a nice little tribute to John David Ebert, maybe incentivize him to come on the show. So this is the monthly Q&A, and my fans have sent me good questions, and really it filters the content as well. And, really getting quality questions that aren't going to be nonsense, like if I were to live stream and do a public Q&A, which maybe, I'm not, me and Prude, when we do Digital Archipelago, we always sort of, really every stream, I got to go back to solo streaming, but I really don't like solo streaming, to tell you the truth. I like streaming with a partner that I trust, like Matt, Prudentialist. I say this after 2 years with someone I didn't exactly trust. But anyways, I like doing it with a partner because I feel that I can take breaks, I can think, I can rest my voice the way that I record the Jenna Review series or other things. It's really, I need the dynamic of a conversation. But if you people enjoy my solo streams, once in a while I'll bring back the laid back Saturdays. But this is the fan Q&A. This is the Patreon Q&A. And like I say, it is really good questions, and I hope all of you listen, even though you're not patrons. But hopefully, if only a fraction of you listening to this become patrons. Anyways, I'm shilling too hard. But you guys like when I rant. You like when I rant. So yes, I will eventually get to Art After Metaphysics. So that is to incentivize. Subscribe to patreon.com/productions. So this is the fan Q&A, and let's do some lighter ones before we get into the heavy work where I require more thinking. So here we go. This is, I don't know if I should say their names though. If it seems that their name is real, then I won't say it, just to protect my patrons. They don't want to, you're donating to a far-right podcaster. People call me a, Austrian painter fan or whatever. So this is by Billy H. I replied to him. He asked me this a few times. What is your opinion on Doctor Who? Now, I've never watched Doctor Who. I think that, of course, having a series that has spanned so long, that of course it would innovate in the field of science fiction, in in the field of futurism and science fiction. But unfortunately, like a lot of like Britpoppers, a lot of like British leftoids just love Doctor Who. Not always. I mean, I know that Millennial Woes is a fan of Doctor Who, but it's not for me. It's not for me. I've never watched it. And it's kind of like Coronation Street. Believe it or not, I would probably have a better run with watching Coronation Street than Doctor Who. I know, I know. But it's just that a lot of, apart from like Kino things that have, and I know this is like a theory cell, like fart huffing point, but like, it's like with Serial Experiments Lane, or it's like Blade Runner, or other things, if it's basically science fiction that's basically theory fiction, then I'm all for it. Like, I'll invest the time. But when it comes to like serial stuff that is in the genre of science fiction, apart from like nostalgic things that I have attached to when I watched them when I was a kid, like Farscape, for example, like when I was a kid, I would like, I think it was on TVO or it was on YTV, and I would like watch it, apart from things I have a nostalgic attachment to, I'm not really a big fan of modern, like a lot of contemporary science fiction. Apparently, like Doctor Who, like really did a nosedive into wokeness. This is what people have said. Not to say like automatically poop hot, because when you have something that, what has it been since the 50s? I think like to watch all of Doctor Who is almost impossible, right? So if Doctor Who is your thing, if you grew up with it, if you grew up in a particular era of Doctor Who, or like what people say is like the lore of like what is the best Doctor Who, I think I watched a few episodes when Christopher Elkinson was Doctor Who for a brief time. I love him as an actor. I don't know what happened to him, but because I guess one of my favorite films when I was a kid is 28 Days Later. That's why I like him as an actor. But no, I've not watched Doctor Who. I can't say yay or nay. Maybe if you want to red pill me on it, then I'd be open to it. But it's sort of intimidating. But, in terms of my taste, in terms of, watching, for example, Australian daytime television dramas, I probably would enjoy Coronation Street. I remember my aunt used to watch Coronation Street, and she, maybe I should get into it with her again. But anyways, so I'm sorry, Billy. Yeah, not too big on Doctor Who, not one way or another. So this is a good one by Merrick. This is an amazing one. I love it's kind of a satirical one. Imagine you were wealthy and landed after the Thiel patronage of your art blew up. Please, Peter Thiel, fund me and my artist friends. I have a ton of them. Some of them are very small accounts. Please, we need to get this happening. We need to do 1 million LD50 galleries. We need to have a Thiel art gallery in literally every major city in America, and in every major art center in Europe, in London, in Paris, Eastern Europe. I know as much as I don't really enjoy it. Well, it's understandable, of course. As much as I don't enjoy Poland's attitude towards Russia in this current conflict, but I Poland apparently does have a based and red-pilled art scene. They're one of the few countries that can get away with it without it being crushed by, most major metropolitan, art centers like London and Paris and New York. So, but anyways, yes, Peter Thiel, get on this. Please, I need the Thiel bucks. Me and my friends, we are desperate for you. Please. Just don't just give it, listen, I know that, Anna Kachayan has taste. Me and her, work out a deal where me and Anna Kachayan arrange a gallery. Me, Matthew Stout, and Anna Kachayan, and Reagan Lodge, all of us will arrange a gallery. So anyways, imagine you were wealthy and landed after Thiel patronage of your art blew up. Our guys have culture by the balls. Now you are hosting dinner party for the who's of this thing we have going, this thing of ours, to quote Thomas 7:7. What would you serve at your estate? As a fellow Italian Catholic, what would you serve for this publicized event? Well, I think I would do something simple yet luxurious. I would probably start with a good antipasto, some of the finest choices. You'd have to have your meat dish. Probably, I would say, really, really great rosemary and, vinaigrette sauce chicken. maybe chicken marsala, not marsala, something tropical, your meat dish, maybe some steak. And of course, you gotta have the pasta, gotta have something fancy. Desserts, a classic tiramisu, like keeping it simple Italian, but, keeping it fresh, keeping it nice, but also having some contemporary choices. Because it's funny because a lot of my life I've been a picky eater, but now, in recent years I've expanded my palate. I still can't eat fish, though, except for I think, shrimp, but, I do like other cuisines. I'm trying to expand, but, I would keep it simple Italian, as a fellow Italian Catholic. So thank you for that question, Merrick. But hopefully Peter Thiel will get us the finest caterers, of course. So here you go. Now, this is a Canadian question. This is by Kefu, who I believe is a Follow the Rules patron that I managed to raid, like a Tartar going through, like a steppe warrior going through the, the blue-yellow steppe, from a Tuvar or a Mongolian. Anyways. What would you say to a Canadian black-pilled on the political election system? Should I even vote? Do I really even matter? Thank God. Thanks, Gio. God bless. No, you do not matter. I hate to say it, but the Canadian political system is done for, and the people in power, basically, you have to, without Fed posting, you have to look at things like this, okay? Even more than America, because in America, specifically with certain rebel factions of the GOP and certain sectors of the corporate world and certain like underground networks of like based people in certain states in the South, in America, you still have a network of based people. You still have an opportunity to, I think, affect change. And, 2016 really demonstrated it. But in Canada, I would say that you have to really look at things as if you are living under an occupational class, an autonomous political occupation class whose sole job is really to erase what any like sinew of the older version of Canada is. And the thing is, though, I think that I always say this, again, I'm consciously aware of like, I don't really focus on a lot of Canadian things, maybe just for OPSEC reasons. Because either A, it's blackpilling, and B, I don't want to get the hassle of like Canadian libs, whatever. But I would say that a lot of Canadian conservatives have this problem where they want to, because I think they consume mostly American media, that they really look through things through the lens of America and American politics. The situation is the same. I mean, okay, certain elements of the situation is the same, right? Right. No, that's Elliot Offen. Let me do the Coach Red Pill. Right? Let me try to do the Coach Red Pill. No, I'm not going to do it. But I think that there's right? I can't even do it. I can kind of do his laugh, but there's a part of the truth to the assertion that a lot of similar situations that are present in Canada are present in America and vice versa. But in terms of the overarching system and the mythos and what drives Americana, or what's left of what drives Americana, things are different. A lot of these convoy people, a lot of these Canadian conservatives, even normie conservatives that are a bit based, than normal. They would look at Orange Man in the States, and they would look at Make America Great Again, and they would say, Make Canada Great Again. But really, that statement embodies the sort of difference between the Canadian experiment, and I do mean experiment, post-nationalism, blah, blah, blah. It's different because you have to discover what makes Canada, what a version of a base Canada would be and to even begin with. And I fear that I don't have a lot of answers apart from certain elements. And I debate about this, and Matthew Stout, he says, Gio, it's your job to find something in Canada that you admire in terms of its spirit. And it's very hard for me, apart from certain works of art, and I'm sure if I dig deeper, I mean, there's that Canadian journal, I know, like, should I mention Duchesne, but I fear that you have to really answer the question, what do you mean by, like, what the potentiality of a Canadian right-wing politics could be? Because you'd have to build it from the ground up. And you'd have to almost, in a way, build it that doesn't really mimic American right-wing culture war politics, which is very hard because really the only network you could think of, like the rebel media, like post-millennial sphere, they're like basically just American conservatives because they're appealing to an American audience that gives them mammons, you know what I mean? And I love, I talk about America in my show a lot because, most of my listeners are American. And most of the people I interact with are American. But that being said, I fear that it's not an easy answer because you'd have to find at least a nominally rightward politics. Even the words like a right-wing Canadian politics is like tongue-tied. I think that, the truckers, they had a potentiality, but they sunk into like American culture war stuff. And of course they're appealing to being amplified, the messaging in America. And there's a whole debate around funding and all that stuff. Like that's, of course, if Americans support what we're doing, that they're going to, give us money. But like this like dark right-wing American money. It was Peter Thiel, funding the bouncy castles. I don't know. And of course, like the whole inquiry is a show trial. So I don't even pay attention to it. It's not worth it. But I think I said something like, I saw that the RCMP said that they didn't really consider like a lot of what was happening as a threat. And as we know from various networks of our political enemies, we know from the get-go that like these people that organized the whole thing, that they were like, there was glowy attention there, like everything. This is inevitable. Anytime like even a nominally like, conservative person tries to go and do something against the script, inevitably you're going to seek the attention of 3-letter agencies, or in Canada, 4-letter agencies, CSIS. But I think I saw some media story that the RCMP, they're like, cool your jets to the political class. But they're, those things are never going to get heated, but, because they'll fall on deaf ears. So I think that the problem is that you have to discover what it is that makes Canada to begin with. Because the basis of most right-wing politics, or not even right-wing, just conservative, or I would say traditionalist politics, is to really, cement what your identity and your unique character is. Your unique character, your unique experiences, your unique culture, and other things, And I think that just to LARP as an American right-winger is not going to cut it. It's not going to... There's so many other obstacles that people on the political right, or even like normie conservatives, face in Canada that isn't present in America. And you really have to discover, how could you even get a fraction of, let's call them heritage Canadians, to agree with your message? And I fear that their picture of what constitutes right-wing politics in America is not adequate. But also their picture of what could potentially be more conservative or traditionalist or whatever, based world in the Great White North. I think that it's, there's a lot of work to be done. And I don't think that I'm the man for the job. I'm an Ellis Islander, or I'm the son of an Ellis Islander. I mean, my father's family has been here for almost 100 years, but it's still, maybe it's not my place. But if there were people that were serious about forming what a Canadian identity even looks like, then I wouldn't immediately poo-pah it. But and by the way, I'm not affiliated with any groups, by the way, in Canada. Maybe Peter Thiel will give me money, but not. But to answer the practical part of your question, if you're black-pilled about the electoral system, Now, there are some advantages to the Canadian electoral system compared to America, but not many. Not many. There's a lot of disadvantages. The political class in Canada has way more power. The Prime Minister has way more power on the executive level than in America. And the autonomous political class is pretty much in lockstep. I mean, if you had to compare it, we're pretty similar to Europe. To Britain, right? In Parliament in Britain. Although, in some ways, I hate to say this, because it's a total debacle with the Conservative Party, with the Tories in Britain, in the UK. Sorry, Britain, but the UK. In some ways, the fact that they could oust a leader like that willy-nilly, that's kind of a bit better. Not to say I support... I think, Sunak... Is that his name, Sunak? Like, he's just a typical, he doesn't look like a leader. He's just a kind of like a party hack. Just like a typical guy. One thing you could say about... As much as I despise Boris Johnson, at least he kind of, had this manic energy going into it in the beginning. But yet, I just... By comparison, this new guy they have, he just doesn't look like a leader. He looks like a functionary. And I think that's the way that Europe is going now that America is basically using almost all of continental Europe as a vassal state. Anyways, but yet they oust their leader. Can you imagine the Liberal Party ousting Justin Trudeau nowadays? No, it would never happen. But, I think I can't tell you legally who to vote for. I would love to vote for Bernier again, but I don't know. I think that when things really get down to it, when's the next election? 2025 or 26? It's not 2024. I think it's 25. When they can call another election. Palaver's not great, but should I even vote? Does it really matter? Or maybe if you don't want to vote, then that's fine. But I think that things will probably get so bad that to hold your nose and vote for the Conservatives would not be a moral judgment, honestly, against Trudeau, against another few years of Trudeau. Who knows what's going to happen? Untold horrors. But anyways, moving on. So thank you, Kefu. Thank you for the question. So, this is I'm gonna really have to censor this one. So this is by Thick Mac, double C's, both of them. Hey Gio, what are your thoughts on the use of blue-yellow, the color combination, not the country, and the psycho-spiritual effectiveness it has on libs? I can't help but feel that the support for the current conflict from professional liberals is partially due to the flag color combination. I am consistently see blue-yellow overutilized in flat human design made, which is a style exclusively catering to the professional liberal class. So maybe there's some connection. Anyways, thanks for being one of the few guys on the right who doesn't ask an 11-minute question to his guest. Well, actually, is that? I do ask 11-minute questions to guests. I'm sorry, but thank you. Your stuff genuinely rocks, man. Well, thank you, Thick Mac. Thank you very much. Yeah, there is something to the blue-yellow color combination. There is something about, I think, why they drafted the flag when they were, declaring independence, the nationalist movement in the blue-yellow country, is, they denoted the sky, the pure blue sky, and the steppe field, the wheat. And it's funny because yellow, in terms of the color wheel, yellow is across from purple. And if you mix them, you can get very good grays and muds and so forth, and you get different mauves. And of course, yellow shifting to either the green yellow or orange yellow, so hot or so cool or hot. Same with purple. But, blue is... there is something to that combination of blue and yellow. There is something very vivid, very simple, but also those high chroma, the cyan blue and basically primary yellow. There's something about that. Also there was some like weirdo conspiracy theory about the last 2 years, the biomedical state of exception, how really a lot of colors in emergency services, especially in hospital settings, are the same blue and yellow. But I think it's a coincidence. It's not like some conspiracy. Because I think, there's people that were going to predict a war happening in the blue-yellow country since, the early 90s, really. Even before that. I think even Zhirinovsky said so. But, one of the basest men to ever come out of the fall of the Soviet Union. One of the most based and red-pilled. Based world. It's a shame that he passed. He truly was a future citizen of based world, Zhirinovsky. Anyways, liberals, partly due to the flat color combination. Yes, there's also like some professional managerial color scheme and graphic design going on there. There's something that denotes like basically the functional organs of modern liberal managerial society. The medical system, a lot of corporate schemes, a lot of basic services have the same color schemes. There is something deeply primordial there within the liberal consciousness. There's some kind of color theory psyop going on. I wonder if there's some significance there. If I were to, Google blue-yellow combination. So I wonder... there is something powerful there. And I wonder what Goethe says. I wonder, because he had the whole like book about color theory. So there is something very powerful there. But yeah, there's probably, I would think it does, they are primary colors and they do denote a sort of managerialism. But anyways, moving on. Oh boy. Oh, this is from Hermes. Thank you, my friend. Hi, Gio. I'd love to hear your musings on the muse-artist relationship. Has the modern dating landscape changed this relationship? What is lost and what is gained if the relationship exists mostly online? This is an amazing question. I'm going to have to think about this one. Oh, my God. Now, there are problems with the muse that I'll get into. I looked up some of these articles, which is a mistake because these people don't know what they're talking about. But the muse is very important. And, I covered this a little bit in my Solo Variety Mega Show when I talked about the simp as a higher ideal. I think that the muse is often a higher ideal for men that doesn't necessarily denote a purely physical sexual relationship. A lot of the times they're women who inspire men and I think women also have a muse in a way. They have their own animus, masculine figure in their lives. Sometimes this is very destructive though, like in the case of Anais Nin and her father. Anyways, the people, like, let me read you this article. This is from, what's this, The Elephant here? Is this what it's called? Yes, elephant.art. This art interviewing, so it goes through, like, the history of the muse, how they often had menial tasks so the artist can focus on their work, and also they were, like, in this sort of tale of servitude. The image of a beautiful waif as a source of creative revelation to a brooding older artist has been perpetuated in countless films. And this is evil and patriarchal. And of course, a younger woman with an older man. Oh my God, that's terrible. A lot of artists are kind of like late bloomers too. You know that, right? So really the whole age discourse, as I've said, in my Patreon, general reviews, that really punishes people who are late bloomers, such as myself. But so they were interviewing this artist, what's her name? No, Claudel was the statue, the statue by Camille Claudel, talking about how a woman can also have a muse. So this is the last paragraph. This is this artist, Macab, a female artist. The attitudes surrounding these kinds of artistic partnerships are now outdated. though there's an argument to be made that's still not all that equal in the art world. Oh, yeah, right. I'm sure it's not all that equal. You know, if you're a man in the art world, you're not going to, unless you have some other identity selling point, you're not going to make it. I'm sorry. So we don't tend to hear as many contemporary artists talking about muses these days. So is the concept truly a thing of the past? McCabe says, I don't think that we're seeing a disillusion of the muse, more reframing of the traditionally held notions of it. If we were to redefine the concept of a muse as something more human, as coming together of ideals between two people instead, perhaps that would help in getting us closer to seeing these involved as artists and creatives in their own right. For McCabe, the notion of an artist muse should be simple. The relationship of muse and artist should not be about collaboration and the exchange of power, not the hoarding of it. No, wrong. Okay, here's the thing. You all know that I viciously critiqued trad LARPers over the years when it comes to the work of art, okay? But here's where I agree with, people like Brendan Hurd at Trad Western Art. If you distort that gendered relation of the muse and the artist, whether it's even when it comes to a male muse and a woman artist. I mean, there was Anais Nin wrote this erotic story of this nature where a woman, she doesn't want a woman artist, a portraitist, doesn't want to have sex with this beautiful younger man, because of it would ruin that relationship. So you need this. I agree with returning to tradition when it comes to the muse, in the extent that, yes, of course, by the modern circumstances, men and women are more quote unquote equal in their relationship. And there will be more of a dynamic there, especially an artist dating another artist. But when it comes specifically to a muse, there still is that higher ideal. There still is that higher ideal that can only be expressed through the masculine and the feminine and vice versa. This whole, they're going to be equal, that's never going to work. Then you might as well get rid of the muse. And most modern male artists, the ones that do exist in the art world, do they have a muse? Maybe. Maybe not. A lot of times they don't. Because they're afraid of it, because of all this baggage of the muse. Here's this is from the other article. This is from Women's Art Blog, which they have a popular Twitter and Instagram. Not Instagram. Yeah, Instagram. About how the muse, while being an object of desire and inspiration, is also an empty canvas to be manipulated by the whims and shapes of the expressions of the creator. And of course, talking about Picasso employing ladies of the night to, distort their faces, but even though ignoring why Picasso manipulated perspective that way, then it talks about Frida Kahlo, Lee Krasner as the wife. And here's the thing, I do agree that women were overlooked who did have talent. That is not right. Of course, I don't agree with that. But, you could say Diego Rivera was just as much a muse to Frida Kahlo, as the painting she did of Diego. And, about, it's creepy and it's exploitive and it's unpaid labor. It's emotional labor. That was one thing this one tweet went viral. This was a year ago. Really disgusting, just getting rid of the spiritual implications of the muse, okay? This is terrible. Now, I've had a few muses. None of them are good. And some of them are. But, as a male artist, you need that. And maybe as a woman artist, you also need that. But I can't speak to women who are artists. I know a lot of women artists, but maybe they have a muse, maybe they don't, And a lot of them are taken. And they don't want to date Gio, so I don't really care. They could go... No, never mind. Anyways, it's terrible. It's terrible. But the thing is, you're an empty canvas. No, listen, okay? Listen, this is why, and let me tell you something. This, and am I shooting, man? To quote the Iron Sheik, a shoot interview right here. I'm in this from the heart. This is me revealing the business, okay? You know why women forego a lot of their, let's call them red flag alerts for artists, right? That even if they're poor, even if they're red flags, you know why they do that? Where, a lot of these artists were not Giga Chads. Unless you're Gustav Klimt, he was pretty much a Giga Chad. But or even Rodin was a Giga Chad. A lot of these women, they will forego their usual testing and their usual, very deep lizard brain Jedi women mind tricks over men when it comes to artists. You know why? Because a normal functioning man of relatively sound status and income, you know, they can provide a life for a woman. They can provide a family. But why would the starving artist, why would a woman be enthralled by artists who don't have those normal markers of stability, who are emotionally, financially, even spiritually disturbed and, you know, not equanimous to a stable lifestyle? Why do they do this? Because the artist can give a woman something that a normal Chad cannot. You know what that is? An artist can give a woman immortality. An artist can give a woman, and maybe a woman artist can give a man this, but of course I think women art is different. But that's another conversation for another time. Not to say that's less valuable, it's immensely valuable, but a woman does art differently than a man, obviously. And to say that this is a evil thing to say, who cares? It's just the truth. It's reality. A woman will experience the work of art, her own work of art, differently than a man's. I truly believe this. And you could say, oh no, Gio, it's the same. But I don't know. I don't know about that. But not to say that, you know, I love, you know, I'm a fan of a lot of women artists. You know, it's not to say that I hate women artists, that they're less valuable than men. I don't think that Lenora Carrington is less valuable than the Dali. I mean, there could only be one Dali, but there could only be one Lenora Carrington. I think she's immensely more valuable than even Frida, but, you know. Yeah, you know, Lee Krasner, Georgia O'Keeffe, Helen Frankenthaler. You know, yeah, of course. You know, I've talked about them. I've did videos, even contemporary ones. But anyways, I have a few friends who are very amazing artists who are women. By the way, shout out to my friend Faust. Fausty, shout out to, of course, Gifts Are Given. Shout out to my friend Georgina. You know, shout out to my friend Chelsea. You know, shout out to my friend Christina. Yeah, anyways, moving on. So, I think that women will experience artwork differently, but when it comes to that, why a woman will fall for an artist, it's because we can give them a spiritual life through the work of art that normal men cannot. Okay? That is the artist-muse relationship. That is something that needs to be preserved. That is one of the few areas of art and art theory where I say, yes, return to tradition. Maybe not totally exploitive, but to frame it as something like emotional labor, like, it's so disgusting. This materialist, like, butchered Marxism that is applied in that statement. That, oh, it's exploiting women's emotional labor. Okay? The fact that a lot of muses don't even have sex with these artists, like, it shows that there's a higher relationship there. But nowadays, it's a very interesting question. Because a male artist will have to grapple with the fact that the muse is going to come with much more baggage. Nowadays, you know, the modern, liberated, post-sexual revolution woman, then, you know, they're going to have to be honest. And, you know, there was an era where there was their own, like, sexual revolution in Weimar Germany. And you know what painters like Egon Schiele did? Egon Schiele exposed the grittier side of female nature in ways that other artists could not. And I think that you have to realize that if you're an artist, if you're a male artist and you have a muse, that muse is going to carry with her the assumptions of the modern world that we live in. And you shouldn't be afraid sometimes to express those things. You shouldn't be afraid to see what is both beautiful and spiritually uplifting in the feminine, but what is also dark and chthonic and corrupted. You know, we live in a condition that is in a way unique, but in a way not really unique. If you were to compare the social situation in Weimar Germany to today, and look at the Expressionists. And there is a question coming up about Dada, by the way. So, you know, this whole thing about the active role and the passive, and it's like, really ignore all of this crap, this analysis. There is something to it, but these people, they want to destroy what the muse is. They really do. They want to destroy what has been motivating men for time immemorial. It's really something. But anyways, the second part of this question. How modern dating landscape has changed this relationship. Well, you experience the woman virtually. You don't engage the muse organically anymore. You have to work because that woman will present to you and most other people an idealized version of herself online. And really dating apps, women have all the power there, but anyways. So you have to deal with discovering anew the complex layers of the feminine in the modern woman. And that takes extra effort. But that's why in the other question leading up to the online dating thing, what is lost and what is gained if the relationship mostly exists online? What is lost is the intimacy, but what is gained is an idealized picture. I love that framing of the question, not like, should we return, or should we abandon this, or should we, what is to be done? But what is rather, I love the way that Hermes framed this question, that what is lost and what is gained. Because it's not the automatic assumption of, it's all over, man. Post the soy, post the chud jack. It's so over, It's rather a reconciliation that we do gain something, we do lose something. What we gain in terms of the e-girl, for example, being a muse, is you already have a ready-made, idealized picture. And in some ways, it will solve the quandaries of what the feminists want, in that a woman is actively crafting her own image, right? A woman is engaging in that artistic participation through the act of an e-girl creating her online presence that you then simp for and have a parasocial relationship with. But the point being is that what is lost is that you don't do that discovery, because the artist needs to engage with the subject matter on an incredibly intimate level, and the artist must pick and choose what to take and what to throw away, and what to highlight and what to ignore, right? You don't get that with the e-girl. You don't get that with the online profile. You don't get that with the anon e-girl or this, OnlyFans, whatever, or, you only get the idealized picture. So the lack of intimacy is what is lost. But within that lack of encountering with that muse, what you gain is something that is already in the process of creation. But it's very complicated because you have to find different ways of expressing the impossibility of true bodily intimacy. I'm experimenting as well with white writing different figures, where it's like one is like this, cave-like platonic cave figure where he's crawling on the ground and he's touching a screen, and on top is like this portal that goes to these women dancing. In Matthew, he has done work like this where a man is like surrounded by these ethereal e-girls through a screen while looking at a computer screen. Like I love stuff like that because it's a concretized representation of the impossibility of intimacy in the online world. But it also does the job of idealization for you in a much more direct and immediate manner, because you are not seeing the woman qua woman as this individual woman, but you are seeing an idealized picture of what femininity is, right? Now, for example, I was there, please, I don't, I am a good Catholic boy. I don't look at these things, but there's this e-girl on Twitter I saw, I think is Justin Wang followed her. And she's like this fairy, she always poses nude in front of her mirror, and there's plants, and she lives, they all live in New York, obviously. And, she could be like really, a thought and whatever, promiscuous woman. She kind of looks like it with a trashy millennial tattoos. But when you do I forget her name. I think it's Fairy something. When you see this woman pretending, when you see this woman expressing this fae, ephemeral, fairy, pixie type of character, yes, it drags the simps in like a net, like Mr. Burns' ocean cleaner net, just scrapes everything off, right? Just scrapes all the simps up, right? But, OnlyFans, the bio and all that stuff. But, political e-girls in the New York podcasting scene that hang around Chapo Trap House that have OnlyFans. The legion of manic BPD art girls, art hoes that listen to Red Scare. This is why I must go on Red Scare. And Anna will deliver one of her followers to me as a perfect muse. But yeah. Anyways, that was a ghost laugh right there. Ghost BTR. Sorry, Ghost True Capitalist Radio, not BTR. Oh my God. Imagine Ghost on Follow the Rules. That'd be amazing. But anyways, yes. The thing is, though, I remember looking at this woman and thinking, it's basically just a game. It's like, I'm woo, I'm cute, I'm a fairy, I'm a magical creature, even though I'm selling you nudes. But it's like, really, this woman, her material existence could be totally against the mythologization of her. I'm not judging her. I'm saying, like, just by, the typical red flags, you could probably see it. If you're a woman posting nudes on the internet, I don't know, something, I can kind of judge where your sexual morals come from. Where they are, but, hey, listen, I'm not trying to judge anybody, but I am judging someone. No, but I'm not judging this individual woman. I'm just saying in general, if you have an OnlyFans in the bio, I don't know. Anyway, call me an old fogey, right? But when you pull back, though, the idealization of that woman, the idealization of this woman as a fairy creature, you know what I mean? Like, this is the thing. This is the problem. You are presented with this opportunity to idealize a woman like this. And, Matthew, he's drawn e-girls and, cam women, and really trying to lift these women of the night, if you will, of the digital night, ladies of the night, friends of the road, bud, to quote Ray from Trailer Park Boys, when Bubbles like, I think they're ladies of the night. He's like, friends of the road, bud, friends of the road. To lift them, and artists have done this. People, they give Picasso so much crap about drawing, ladies of the night. But really, I mean, he's lifting them into immortality. He's taking what is an exploitive, terrible relationship that I don't wish any woman on, that I wish does not exist, in terms of its degradation of the feminine, and trying to at least create something beautiful. And you could say, oh, she exploited them. Yeah, maybe he did exploit them. I mean, come on, he was a Spanish-French man. So, he was a Mediterranean. He was a med. What do you want? What do you want? So, but that being said, I do feel that a charitable look at what artists have done throughout the ages with women of the night, like, first of all, they're easy access in terms of being a model, in terms of their looks, in terms of just paying them to stand there. Hello? What's easier? Getting paid to stand there, getting paid to... Anyways, you know the deal. So, I feel that the problem is, though, there's a lot of artists that have, like, abused women. Carl Andre, even Lucian Freud, like, abandoned his children and, slept with women that loved him and betrayed them. And he wasn't a good... Lucian Freud wasn't a good dude. You know what I mean? So, and Carl Andre, what he did was unspeakable. So, yeah. Oh, because I'm saying this because Ana Mendieta is one of my favorite artists, But I feel that apart from the obvious abuse that goes into that relationship, to frame it as, and this is a serious point, to frame it as emotional labor, to frame it as solely exploitive, or to frame it as something that what it's not, with modern political neurosis, that's crap. The Muse is so much more than that. It's so much more than that. But anyways, I can go on forever. If you have a follow-up question, Hermes, I do feel that there is something lost and something gained with having an online muse. I have a few of them, actually. But anyways, moving on. All right, we are back. I like the music breaks, but I hope you like Philip Daniel, as I always... I gotta stop doing the Bap voice. But I'm serious, if you people do have Kino and Nectar old copies of Wired Magazine that you'd want to send me, or any books, actually, I could arrange, the books I don't have, I could arrange some P.O. box, or... I know some people have that, people send them stuff like a P.O. box. But if I trust you, I'll just give you my address. But anyways, if you were serious about sending me something. But anyways, that's, for my friends, especially if you're a patron. If you're a patron and you want to send me something, I trust you enough. I mean, I send people artwork and that has my address on it. So anyways, getting back to the Q&A, a lot of great questions. I also have been emailed some questions that are longer. So here we go. We have one about photography, but let me read the Dadaist one. I was reading the Dada Manifesto, and there was another manifesto by the Symbolists and then the Futurists. There's a great book by the Futurists that me and Matthew the Stout covered. This is by Jeff M.M. I'm probably not doxing him here. Me and Matthew the Stout, if you look at Style Talks, I believe episode 3 and 4, we cover a book by the Symbolists that's like the definitive book. The title eludes me, but go to those, listen to those. It's on YouTube. It's on my channel. It's on Odyssey. We basically cover the book cover to cover. Do you have any book? I think Futurism may have started in Italy. Yes, of course. There's precursors to it elsewhere. There's, of course, Vorticism, which is like Anglo-futurism in England. There are precursors to futurism in France, in Germany, and elsewhere. Do you have any book recommendations covering these art movements? I'm asking because the Dada one seems satanic, which it probably is. I think the Symbolist one is kind of satanic too. Not that into Satan, but it was just kind of weird that art and Satan would be connected. Well, it's not actually weird if you look at the history of it. But no, the Symbolists were pretty much anti-Satanist. Well, I can't say it for all of them. But if you're talking about the ones that were inspired by Christian iconography, such as Gustave Moreau, then it's good stuff. It's a bit eclectic, bit Gnostic. But in terms of a good book, there's plenty of books you could find on Dadaism. Let me find one actually on my shelf here. There's this one by Hans Richter called Dada Art and Anti-Art, which is pretty good. But there's a lot of academic theory cell works on Dada. I think even Camille Paglia talked about Dada. And there's a lot of Freudian and post-Freudian psychoanalysis people in academia that talk about Dada, from a Lacanian perspective. Lacanian, to quote Zizek. There is also, if you want a general overview, one of the, but it's quite a pretty penny. It's quite a big book. It's by Hall Foster. A lot of Hall Foster, I think he talks about Dada as well, but it's called Art Since 1900. If you want a good overview of modern and contemporary art, that's a really good resource. And also, I believe, even Shock of the New, in Shock of the New, both the book and the documentary, but the documentary is free on YouTube by Robert Hughes. That's a good resource as well. So if you want to learn about Dadaism, but Dadaism, I do maintain a distinction between Dadaism and the German Expressionists, being separate in that their intent to create different pictures of the world and different politics. A lot of the German Expressionists, like the Dadaists, were communists, and they were, But there were like more traditional, like left labor people. They were against the war, and a lot of them were veterans, like Otto Dix. There's this horrendous. By the way, she got banned recently from Twitter. Not that I recommend anyone getting banned, especially under the light of Elon. The savior of the heaven site. I'm recording this when people are freaking out that Twitter is going to disappear. But that mega chick, it's funny because Paul Talk, he wrote a response to her. She had this tweet about, this is art produced by war veteran. This is the art produced by, draft dodgers or whatever. And it's crazy. First of all, Monet, she used the Impressionists. I just despise trad LARPers like her. So she got banned recently. R.I.P. Bozo, Packwatch, rest in piss, you won't be missed. But she got married to some English guy, so at least that's good honor for. Never mind. I don't want to diss her too, but wow, something about being arrogant, but like not having a really well-formed opinion, just really grates at me. Because the thing is, and I think I'm gonna go on his show someday, or he's gonna be on Content Minded, hopefully this year. But someone like Brendan Hurd, trad Western art, as much as I disagree with a lot of what his points about the work of art, at least he like studied things, even though I think that, and I'll talk about this with him, so I'm not talking mad smack, but I think that he underplays why the modern artists did the things that they did. I think he says, for example, what Picasso was doing is just a gimmick. And, I'm not a big fan of the later Picasso. Picasso became a kitschmonger of himself, but anyways, people like Mega just really annoy me. But she had the point about like this is the art produced by war veterans. This is and it's some like kitschy, gaudy, academic like Bouguereau knockoff against an Impressionist. But if you look at the German expression, I'm pretty sure Mega would despise the German expressionists. But a lot of them were war veterans, though. So you really can't use that argument. It's so stupid. But I know Otto Dix was a veteran. There was a few of other ones. But anyways, that's besides the point. Not to spend too much air on obnoxious people. But, someone like Trad Westerner, it is worth engaging with and is worth critiquing because, he's more of a serious figure. And someone like Mega. Anyways, moving on. So yes, there are a number of books you can find on Dadaism, but I'm not a big fan of Dada. I think that Dada, especially later on, when you approach the 30s, for obvious reasons, they basically let their left-wing politics consume them. Same with surrealism. I mean, this is why Salvador Dali got denounced. There's this one like bread tube, like these video essayist people. This one guy's like, Salvador Dali and the Austrian painter. It's like Salvador Dali and fascism or whatever. It's anyways. Salvador Dali was a base trad and he had a lot of based opinions. And that's why surrealism made him write that letter that he probably wrote in jest. He probably wrote facetiously just to appease them, right? Like he probably didn't actually mean it. About like, yeah, I'm still a good communist and all this, but he was trolling them essentially. Like, the Dali was a consummate troll. But Dadaism, I think, is still intellectually worth examining, and certainly a lot of the tactics that you find on the contemporary E-right, at least from 2016, the frogs onwards, a lot of it you could say is a form of reactionary neo-Dadaism or a form of situationist type upending of the real, if you will. If you look into the situationists and how they were correlated with a lot of Dadaists, But anyways, yeah, there are books out there. Hall Foster is, of course, if you want more or less a neutral one, a good critique of not just Dadaism, but I think a lot of the impetus of artistic modernism comes from people like Donald Cuspit, Even though Donald Cuspit's still a lib, he's still a 90s lib, that's the best you're going to get in terms of... Same with Brad Tromel, Brad Tromel on Instagram. I don't think he does art anymore. I think he just does art commentary. Like if I said this to my good friend Adam Lehrer, I said this to Adam once. I said that, if Brad Tromel wasn't a lib, he could really like unleash himself, and he could sort of like touch wires that he consciously avoids. But anyways, that's besides the point. Moving on. Now this is a question that so Mr. Barb himself, he asks how Kino is this song. It's like this power metal song that I will link in the description. I mean, I'm not a big fan of power metal, though. I'm more of a prog, tech death type of dude. But this is a question about photography, which I will get to. But this says by Ziz Hunter, Z-I-Z Hunter. What is the Geo take on video games? I'm not convinced that apart from like very small budget, auteur-driven video games, indie games, I'm just not a fan of like viewing video games as a work of art. I'm sorry. I think that purely on a definition basis, the work of art, again, I'm not very formulated in this thought, but I just think that the work of art does something different. And I think video games, in terms of like the vast majority of them, are basically just entertainment, and they're, designed to lull you into whatever. And a lot of like major studio video games are total trash. And I'm not a gamer. I'm not, I'm not into the video game thing. The only like real video games I played when I was younger was like, GTA and like Modern Warfare 2. I'm not big into video games. I'm not into the lore. I'm not the guy to go to. I'm not bashing them, mind you. I'm not like against gamers or whatever. I'm just saying it's not, I don't know why. I just figured that they were a waste of time later on. But like, if you're really into video games, I'm not knocking you. I mean, I think perhaps in some respects, there's certain elements of video games that can be, works of art. But yeah, I mean, but in general, I think like, I don't know, maybe you should spend less time gaming, I think. Maybe unless a game is like really meaningful to you, then you'll like spend time grinding at it. But, my friend, for example, my best friend in real life, he is a big Halo guy. Like he absolutely has like a very strong nostalgic connection to Halo, which I don't. So anyways, I mean, yeah, I think that, it's, I get a lot of heat for saying this, and I'm consciously aware of why, but it's probably like a good thing if you like, not like totally get rid of video games, but just like, cool it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like just like out of all the things you could be doing, I think that moderation in video games, you really are like not building quote unquote, skills or whatever. You're building a certain form of skill, but it's not like people that waste hours upon hours upon hours. I think like there's a certain point where you're like grinding in a game that you probably should, do something else. You probably should, learn a skill or a hobby or improve your job or whatever. Like it's, or improve your love life or something. You know what I mean? Like I think gaming, unfortunately, is kind of like a distraction, and most like modern games do not have that like patina and that like creativity that older games do. It's just a fact, even though I critique vulgar tradism, I think that it's true when it comes to video games, that modern video games, they can increase the graphics and the playability and whatever crap metric that these soy jack redditors think makes a good game, but they're never gonna like beat the skill of a lot of these neurodivergent video game programmers overcoming limitations within very confined parameters of what you could do with a game. So I'm sorry. Yeah, when it comes to returning to tradition, video games are probably like the best context of what you mean by returning. But anyways, moving on. There was another aspect of the discussion about the symbolists that I wanted to address. That being the way that the question is formulated about the Satanism aspect. I think that, for example, Pelletien, the writer and promoter of the symbolists, talked about the divine andrine And I think a lot of things within a spiritual context, especially when you're claiming to go back to, and me and Matthew, we addressed this. Going back to older wisdom traditions is quite different. And it's really about the element of the divine feminine and masculine finding their equal co-communal parts together. Even in ancient times, for example, that one part in the Symposium by Plato, by Socrates, but written by Plato. It was a middle dialogue, I believe, where right before Diomeda comes and gives her definition of real love being love of the forms. I forget who proposed it. The one speaker, the character speaker in the Symposium, that talked about how man and woman are connected together because they came from that original source of oneness in the Ouroboros. But then, the gods cut man and woman together, and so we're trying to find each other's parts, not to vulgarize it, but a lot of people abuse these ancient wisdom traditions, and they, graft some kind of like modern, global homogenous politics onto them. And it's really something when you do analyze this, and a lot of, the problem is in Europe and then later America, a lot of charlatans and not very good people have latched on a bunch of stuff to these, claims that they're recapitulating an older wisdom tradition with these mystery schools and so forth. And you could go down the gamut. And there's been a lot of hucksters and charlatans, both in the East and the West. But, in the East later on, it's funny because U.G. Krishnamurti, not Jiddu Krishnamurti, but U.G. Krishnamurti, he studied yoga for so many years. And he said, listen, it's all crap. And basically, all these like gurus came to the West and like tricked Westernoids into buying their Baroque, seemingly nonsensical practices and wisdom traditions and so forth. And I think that in the West, you're not immune to it. So a lot of very like Frankish, transgressive, neo-Gnostic stuff has been attached to the symbolists, and you must work to sort of separate the good from the bad. And so, Gnosticism is an older ideal than we think. And the reason it's heretical for a reason. To say that we have to overcome the limitations of the body and of gender and of this world itself is evil, created by the demiurge. And, this is what I mean. Like, and a lot of Gnostics, a lot of modern Gnostics, they're very pro, never mind. They're pro a certain people that's very curious. And they have this very, having experienced this on a Follow the Rules, they have a very like hairwire, insane hatred of Christianity. I wonder why. Maybe because they know something deep down, about the truth of Christ that really makes them infuriated. Not all of them, but I think that intellectually it's a very curious ideal. But there are elements within the symbolists that that are very like neo-Gnostic and do have less than salient based world politics, put it that way, or people have later attributed to them. And I think a lot of art movements, especially in the, from the 19th century onwards, suffers from this problem where politically, and the New Age movement in general, by the way, and we all know their relation to intelligence agencies and so forth, they suffer from the problem of, like most Gnosticism or Gnostic ways of thinking, suffers from the problem of the, transgression against what we consider quote unquote based world politics. And neo-Gnosticism is something that, should be tread upon very lightly in terms of your own intellectual development. And so the political right, I think, has been fighting a war against a lot of Gnostic ways of thinking, whether we like it or not. But then the problem is, though, is that people bastardize this and they try to like say that everything is Gnosticism. Like that Twinkzor guy recently, it's like everything is Gnosticism is everything I don't like. And, a lot of Straussians and so forth talk about this. I know Keith Woods had these takes against that way of thinking. Is everything Gnosticism? And he's kind of correct, though, because they're not really, the progs, they're not really building a higher world. They're really building a world that is not advantageous to life. And I think that the symbolists, the painters and the poets and so forth, they did have a vitalism attached to them. They were trying to build an art movement that was akin to spiritual life that was quickly fading in continental Europe at the time, post-Enlightenment. And a lot of like neo-romanticism informed the symbolist painters and so forth. And, symbolism, of course, is kind of different as well in Russia. Repin was trying to comment on an older Russian folklore tradition that in Western Europe was sort of, manifested much more eclectically, almost perennially. So the symbolists in Russia were quite different in some ways. So I think that, to explore them in terms of how an art movement can be created that honors something much older than ourselves. The symbolists and the Vienna Secession people that informed Art Nouveau, I think that it's worthy to look at them as a model of creating a total art that has so many elements of life and bringing aesthetics into use the way that our ancestors did not treat the work of art as an aestheticization of life, as merely the creation of the art object, but rather the work of art was taken up ritualistically and taken up into a variety of different life practices that informed faith and tribal life and so forth. So I think that a lot of these attempts in the 19th and 20th century by these art movements is essentially trying to recapitulate something much more ancient. And I've said this many times, but it's, worth explicating. But that's my take. And how this relates to video games is very interesting because people are claiming that video games do this as well. It is a purposeful profanation in the sense that the profane is bringing what is once sacred into use. At least that's, the Giorgio Agamben definition. And I wonder if, in terms of other mediums of entertainment having a higher form of messaging, I wonder if you could say that video games sort of in a way profanate what is high culture in order to bring it into life, into the life of most, especially young men. And from that view, that charitable view, I think that video games are acceptable. But the vast majority of them do not do this. Even the ones that build a world. It's just to sell you that world, to keep playing. It's not really building a true mythology. The way that, for example, anime does. A way that a lot of more youth-orientated entertainment is done. Now, people can say, for example, like Harry Potter, Harry Potter is creating mythology. In a way, yeah, but I mean, come on, it's, I think Harry Potter is interesting because the demographic that read, the millennials, read Harry Potter and grew up with it, and it's like it grew with them, but I was never, I was never interested. I only watched a few movies. But now, of course, J.K. Rowling is based, but, not really. I mean, she's only based in a few issues, But it is interesting to look at how video games do try to create mythologies. And I know that, for example, I think Prude was telling me that Elden Rings is a based game. But I don't know these things, I'm not a gamer. But I think that there is a problem. I remember being in grad school debating this with someone who did their thesis on it, on video games. And I just can't help the fact that it is largely a product of the culture industry. Maybe not Japanese games, but I mean, Japan, they do have their own culture industry. You can't be blinded by the mysticism of Kino Japanese games and Kino Japanese anime. Japanime. You can't be blinded by the fact that they do have their own culture industry. And they do produce schlock that is just to appeal to the sensibilities of like a mass market in Japan and elsewhere in Asia. So I think that you really can't be sucked in by these things. You can't have any illusions. If you're a gamer, you have to recognize that you're consenting to one of the largest, if not the largest, youth culture industry there is. I mean, I think the only thing that's higher in terms of video games is prawn nowadays. I think video games has even eclipsed Hollywood, or it's about to. So you can't have any illusions to it, but I do think that in terms of creating the work of art through the means of popular media, or bringing people a higher aesthetic or mythological awareness through these very profane culture industry things, it is interesting, and there's something to be said about it. But I'm just doubtful, put it that way. I have I'm trepidatious about people get that reference from the Ethan Ralph extended universe. I'm a bit trepidatious about video games as a high art form, put it that way. And this is not to knock gamers, but I think the way in which the symbolists and other like romanticist art movements sort of devolved into design, design that is pure Kino in the work of art by today's standards, like Art Nouveau. But I think that, you have to maintain these elitist distinctions for a reason. Because when you try to bring art into the service of life, there's always a danger that you are just recapitulating another culture industry that must be avoided. So there is always an issue there. But I will answer, these are things to think about, is that when you translate the work of art into service of everydayness, you can't let that everydayness, those utilitarian concerns, corrupt the work of art. This is a debate I have back and forth with Matthew Stout all the time. You have to reserve the place of higher art forms and things that can trickle down. It's sort of like trickle down economics, but for the work of art. When you trickle it down into life, you have to make sure that high art creates Art Nouveau and not Banksy or something of that equivalent. Because Banksy is everyday life, kitschy, politicitch, utilitarian service of hammering a message for, a lot of these art hoes that have Banksy posters in their dormitories and so forth. So you have to make sure that you're aiming for Art Nouveau. You're not aiming for Banksy. And I think that video games have to steer towards, if they want to be utilitarian, they want to be entertaining, and they want to provide a meaningful message, they have to steer towards anime and Art Nouveau and less away from Banksy and the culture industry. And I hate to say it, but these big box store games, these AAA games, a lot of them, they're pure to the hilt with a global homogeneous. They made Call of Duty into that, which is really strange and weird, where they have girl bosses and it's against Russia and it's, trying to stay away from the, anti-Islam posting and so forth. It's like, it's crazy, it's insane. But, and I have a much more sympathetic take on Islam than most people in the political right. But I think that, to avoid the fact, like to avoid it in the European context is insane. It's like, no, they're good, but they're fighting the Russians, and it's like it's insanity. It's like when it comes to like pro versus anti Slav and Russian in the Islamic world, there are factions that are pro and there are factions that are against. Why do you think that one group, the ISIS, if you know what I mean, why do you think that they've been detected in the blue-yellow country? Right? I mean, the CIA pawns that are going against the Chechens, you know? And why do you think that the Chechens that have the certain minority that have defected to the blue-yellow country, they're the ones that were radicalized by, the glow-in-the-darks that were working out of Saudi Arabia during the early 2000s anyways, that were an American and that other nation in the Middle East psychological operation. You know, when they did this in the Balkans, in Bosnia, where they funded them. You know, they really weren't particularly radical Islamists or whatever in Bosnia. It's just, you know, they wanted to take help wherever they could. And, you know, the Americans did this to go against the Russian-backed Serbians, you know. And, of course, the NATO and the American, you know, the State Department has this absolutely all-consuming, seething rage hatred against Serbia. You know, but that's another issue for another time. The point being is that, you know, in Call of Duty, they had to do this, like, weird, convoluted thing to say that, well, no, actually, the Islamists are good people, and it's all the evil Russians, and it's, like, really crazy, right? It's really just CIA propaganda. And here's the thing. People don't think they're immune. Gamers think they're immune. But it's true, and I'm saying this. I'm not hating on gamers. I'm just saying that you have to be aware of these things. Because video games, in terms of the culture industry, are so tightly controlled, even more than cinema. It's very hard to be an indie game dev and make it work. So most big budget AAA rated games are essentially controlled by the culture industry, and there hasn't been that, you know, letting go of the reins that the way there has been in the work of art with outsider art or even cinema with Dogme 95, Artur Cinema. And by the way, my podcasts, I hope, have the spirit of Kino Dogme. It's Kino Dogme 2007, you know, to quote Godwinson. But the point being is that most video games are controlled by the culture industry. And the glowies, as we know, the intelligence agencies, they have inserted their messaging into video games, especially first-person shooters. They've inserted their messaging the way that they have with cinema. You know, we know the connection between intelligence agencies, Rand Corporation-backed groups, NGOs, and think tanks in Hollywood. We all know this. This is a fact. That the American government and various intelligence agencies basically just promote their messaging in cinema. And now they're doing it for video games because it's 10 times more effective. You know what I mean? Call of Duty is like a Pentagon operation. Well, not all of it, but, you know, the messaging of it, I truly believe is highly, highly coordinated with, you know, the State Department and you know, Langley and so forth. It's just a fact. And so as a gamer, not only you should be aware of it, but you should try to avoid schlock. You should try to avoid culture industry cesspool nonsense. And so that's my opinion on video games. But I'll answer a few more questions before we get to the big topic, because I want to spend a long time on this question of if photography is artwork. And also I've been asked if I have favorite photographers who are artists. So moving on to the next question. Let me give you a jokey question. So, oh boy, this is a good one. Please post your response to this scenario, Gio. It's late at night, maybe 1 a.m. It's pitch black outside. And this is by Sneedicus. And by the way, shout out to Sneedicus. Sneedicus is a longtime fan of myself from the Follow the Rules day. And also, I believe he's a patron, and he also he sneeds those super chats to both me and Prudentialist when we do Digital Archipelago. So shout out to Sneedicus. Sneedicus is one of Geo's strongest GeoCell soldiers. So anyways, Sneedicus. Suddenly you hear a knock at the door. It's pitch black outside at nighttime, maybe 1 a.m. Suddenly you hear a knock at the door. You're startled and you open the door. It's Limp Bizkit. He, I'm assuming it's Fred Durst, says he's on the run from a team of Honduran hitmen and the CIA. Geo, what do? Please fully consider any possible outcomes or repercussions. Sneedicus, listen, I'm going to tell you. I will shelter and I will go on the mission for Limp Bizkit and Fred Durst. Maybe not West Borland, but for Limp Bizkit as a whole. I will be Limp Bizkit's strongest soldier. I will go on a deep... I will enlist the help of my friends in the Kremlin. I will enlist their help to, save Limp Bizkit from the glowies. And me and Limp Bizkit will go on a Nikolai Roerish type mission in the Caucasus Mountains to find Shambhala. Fred Durst will find Shambhala. We will be accompanied by Wagner Group, and we will really find Shambhala. We will be accompanied by the finest GRU Spetsnaz and Wagner, and we'll go on a mission to defeat global Satanism by through the music of Limp Bizkit. We will play a concert in Shambhala. We will play Nookie. In the Imperial City, and Based World will be realized, and Limp Bizkit will vanquish the glowies, and so that's gonna happen, and so thank you, Sneedicus, for the question. I look forward to being Fred Durst, his strongest soldier, and I think I'll do a music interlude now. So Based World, listen, people doubt me for nu metal, but let me read you an article. Well, I put this on Twitter, but Aaron Lewis from Stained, who is also friends with Fred Durst, he got caught, doing his country music concert. He got caught saying some very Based World things. He supports MAGA, and he says, maybe we should listen to the guy in the Kremlin, to P-Man. Maybe we should listen to what he has to say. So Aaron Lewis, he's a good Christian. He votes for Trump. He has 3 kids and a beautiful wife. Aaron Lewis was the voice of the angsty Gen X older millennial who is trying to lift themselves off from the decay of the modern world, from the decay of the boomer world order, from the boomer truth regime, gave a voice to all of us who were screwed over by our parents, who were in trailer parks, who didn't have a hope, who were living in the Rust Belt, that had no prospects like our fathers did before us, of working in a factory and providing for our families. Aaron Lewis and Stained gave a voice to Trump's America, to the heartland that was deindustrialized. And so Aaron Lewis is an agent of Based World. Fred Durst is an agent of Based World. Nothingface, by the way, R.I.P. to the singer from Nothingface. He tragically died too soon. I believe he had a heart condition. Nothingface, I've said this, I've tweeted about this. If you listen to their album Violence, they are the sound. And the fact that they had the Leyendecker woman as the cover photo. Nothingface was the sound of middle America in the heartland. If you were to take American Beauty and turn it into basically an album, a metal album, it would be Nothingface. There's something about their sound that just projected that sort of bittersweet longing of the Gen Xers and millennials in the early 2000s and the late 90s. Something that they perfectly captured the sound of late 90s, early 2000s youth culture in the way that no other band could. There's something about their sound that they created that, they talked about, Pulp Fiction and so forth. I think they actually had a song about American Beauty. But, this is why nu metal is a based world genre. And with Aaron Lewis and Limp Bizkit, based world is within our reach. So there you go. That is my nu metal defense. And yes, there are problems in nu metal. Its relation to rap and so forth, and there's problems with it in terms from a right-wing reactionary perspective. But really nu metal. And here's the thing. This is where I disagree with Jefferson Lee and with my good friend Josh Neal, is that they think that nu metal was just like this sappy proto emo stuff where it's always like complaining about your life and your parents. There was a lot of that, especially with Korn. But there was this uplifting, positive message that was continued on from Pantera, because Pantera influenced a lot of nu metal and Sepultura. So there is this uplifting, especially in the chorus. Why do you think pro wrestling, when pro wrestling was Kino in the early 2000s, the Ruthless Aggression era, and the indies and deathmatch wrestling, why do you think they always used nu metal in the soundtracks, in the music videos, in the backyard wrestling video games? Because nu metal had the same uplifting spirit that was in the predominantly European ancestry, working class, blue collar youths in America. They still carried forth that positive message of confronting people, of being your own self, of, and a lot of the lyrics were simplistic, obviously. But they carried that message on from Pantera. This is what I believe. You have to listen to it. And even though Stained is overwhelmingly sort of like a negative, lamenting about your problems and, abuse by your parents type of band, it still is about overcoming those things and using music as a therapeutic device, art form. Like, even though the passion and that's why, Aaron Lewis, when he was singing, he always looked like he was half crying most of the times. But the power of his voice, those Lydian and Phrygian scales that he would use, and the choruses and the vocal harmonies between him and the bassist, I believe, was the backing vocalist. Like songs like Me and songs like Outside, and when they were really metal, and Dysfunction, that album, the self-titled album, songs like See Through, listen to that live set they did at Grunspan in Germany, that live set where they played songs off of Dysfunction and Break the Cycle. Really amazing. And yes, they did, sappy, slow stuff later after Breaking the Cycle. But when they were peak nu metal, they were on. They were on. And Stained is a based world band. Limp Bizkit is a based world band. So together, nu metal will create based world within our reach. So yes. Yes, we're back. I have a very theory cell take on nu metal. And I'll get to the other questions. But I wanted to talk about, now that I've, a few things, and they're interrelated. On this night I'm recording, apparently Orange Man was reinstated on Twitter. And, love him or hate Trump, you have to realize that there's something about him that really strikes to the heart of the American psyche. There's a piece, whether it be a sort of fabulation or a hyperreality, there is, in a way, a hyperreal piece of Americana itself embodied in the rise of Trump and the symbol behind him. And I think for the political right wing, there's always and a lot of this comes from people reading Spangler, obviously, is that there's always recognition of the cycles of history and great men, whether you want to consider Trump a figure or rather he is a sort of like, let's say, postmodern pastiche of this figure, that a great man in history comes about. Now, in a way, this is, Trump in some ways is, he's got that same spirit as nu metal, in a way. You could see it. He's got like that. He's a delicious throwback from the 80s, but also he's like, when pop culture and media was important, there's a little bit of Fred Durst, or rather there's a little bit of Trump and Fred Durst, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's connection is apt, but it seems the sort of in-your-face aggression and the sort of, angst that turns into... Because the older the older millennials and the Gen Xers that, grew up listening to Korn and Limp Bizkit and Stained and Kid Rock and DMX in rap, but, all the Woodstock 99 lineup, put it that way. Those young men grew up and they were the ones who voted for Trump because it seems that Gen Xers and older millennials are forced to take on a reactionary politics because of the present circumstances. But I wanted to sort of talk about culture in a way, and this is a totally theory cell take, and I don't know if it's correct or not. Like most things I say throughout my career, if you want to call it that, on the internet, I don't know if it's correct or not. That nu metal, in a way, really predicted, I think, not in terms of its lyrics per se, or in terms of, not every band was Mudvayne. I mean, a lot of these bands, they didn't have a lot of great musicianship. But, it's funny because Stained is a band that is often neglected bass playing, by the way. Now, a lot of these bands, I think they predicted the vibes of what Heartland, Rust Belt America was experiencing. Because that was the big complaint at the time, or one of them, from mainstream people. That nu metal, in a way, was sort of like an anachronistic force. That it's lament and aggression and teen youth and rebellion, and its capacity to swell up bitterness and resentment and so forth, that this was like anachronistic because we lived at the end of history, man. It's it's the late 90s. It's like it's the most glorious time in the world if you live in the West, of course. Not in Eastern Europe, not in in Africa, not in certain parts of Asia. No, but if you lived in North America in particular, it was the best time ever, right? But I think that like a lot of the themes that are present in a lot of nu metal bands, and I'm listening to Stained again. I remember I listened to Stained way back in I want to say 2002, when my old man, he would download stuff for me on LimeWire, and then I got my own computer, and I remember listening to It's Been a While on the radio. I think that's what it was. And then I listened to, their other albums and so forth. And, Stained is one of those bands that, people were very divided on. They were like, oh, this isn't exactly nu metal. And then later the stuff got slower. And then, Aaron Lewis became a country musician. And it went from the edginess of old Stained to salute the flag, vote for Trump, Christian conservative, But I think that those two things don't conflict with each other. Because Stained really captured, I think, a malaise that the youth of America and, North America in general were feeling, and even in European countries and even throughout the world. That the sort of malaise of the older millennial that manifested into the renaissance of 2016 in a way that it predicted the total descent into despair in ways that I feel a lot of like music that Zoomers listen to don't really. I mean, that's why Zoomers, they're going back to nu metal. They're listening to Breaking Benjamin. They're listening to, Slipknot. They're listening to stuff that, albums that came out when I was their age or even younger. And I think that in a way, nu metal, I think, predicted or preempted the condition we live in now. When you listen to that music now, you could feel it again in a way. It's perennial in that sense. And maybe this is just my own well of nostalgia talking, which is probably clouds my judgment in most things. But I think that, for example, I'll give you, if you listen to the first 3 albums of Stained, right up until Break the Cycle, the first album, it's funny because Fred Durst did not want them on their tour when they came out with Dysfunction, because they saw the imagery of Tormented, which was their first album, where it had like a Barbie doll crucified, and it was like total edgelord stuff, like total edgelord. Aaron Lewis was doing more growling. It wasn't as melodic, but then it got more melodic, and then the point by the time you get to the later albums before they went on hiatus, that it's pure melodic. The nu metal elements were gone. The nu metal and alt metal elements were gone. And Aaron Lewis, unfortunately, as one of my followers said to me on Twitter today, Aaron Lewis discovered that he could make a lot of money just making Outside over and over again. And then he became a country singer. It's like, that's all over. Now he plays casinos and, red state fairs and casinos and so forth. But, Stained, they came out with that newer album. I think, what was it, 2020? It was good, actually. I really liked it. Not as memorable as the old ones, but nothing is always going to be as memorable as the old ones. But why am I talking about this? Why is this interesting to me? If you look at the imagery and if you look at the vibe, the tormented singing of Aaron Lewis, the melodic parts, in Dysfunction, you have the imagery of this gesture or this clown reversed up and down like mirror images. And it really is sort of like the underbelly of middle or lower class life in America is filled with neglect and despair and bitterness and angst and the youth, and this is where songs like For You come from, which you could say is very juvenile, like, a lot of songs by Korn and Seven Dust and Stained and Cold and, even Nothingface. A lot of it was to appeal to like the eternal high school experience of the late 90s, early 2000s, the Columbine generation, if you will. Like, it really, I think, psychically predicted what society was going to be like as a whole now. But now it's different. Now we live in the era of a lot of untold horrors beyond our dreams. But I think that brooding longing that you find, if you listen to the song Me after this podcast, go and listen to the song Me by Stained off of the album Dysfunction. Like, that is a very personal song. It's about addiction and his parents failing him and so forth. But the way that the chorus crescendos and that the Phrygian, I think it was Phrygian vocal patterns and the whole ensemble and the vocal harmonies. Of course, a lot of these nu metal bands like Godsmack and even Stained and other ones around the ones around Seattle, they all got that from Alice in Chains, obviously. And other nu metal bands retained their aggression from Pantera, but a lot of them maintained their vocal stylings from Lane Staley, more or less. Whether Sully Erna or Aaron Lewis or Chad Gray and Mudvayne was listening to other stuff. Edema also. Dry Cell has a lot of that. Like, the chorus is very, in a way, strangely uplifting. A lot of them. Hence why this connection I made between wrestling and nu metal, why they're like wedded to each other. When wrestling was still good, mainstream wrestling, But I think that it predicted the modern condition. But like Dysfunction is a good example. Then Break the Cycle, that's like their huge, you know, like that really like cements their legacy in a way. You know, I mean the singles off of Breaking the Cycle is just insane. Like, come on, you know. How, you know, it's been a while, Outside, you know, but I think that it's indicative of the place that society was at that time. Oh yeah, Open Your Eyes, Pressure. I remember Pressure. The first time I heard the song Pressure, and I remember trying to hunt it down for years, was when I saw this music video I downloaded from LimeWire. It was a wrestling video. It was a small promotion. I think it was called War, but it was like two R's. And it was a special event where they got the Messiah and Sick Nick Mondo to do a death match with light tubes and everything. And I just remember, like, that song Pressure was so apt. Like, you know, yeah, I remember just listen to the song and you'll know it's like immediately a wrestling song in a way. And so I think, you know, this is why I'm a nu metal respecter, because I feel that our current era, in a way, if you listen to those old songs, those old albums, it speaks to you in a way. It speaks to you that even modern metal doesn't. I hate to say it. A lot of like metal that's been released in the past, I would say 5 years, it's like either trying to, in a postmodern way, recapitulate older styles, or it's trying to do like the inclusive Reddit soy jack, like worshipping technicality, which I do like as well. But, you know, that goes too far. Like worshipping technicality, or like, oh, we have a female singer and it's like blah, blah, blah. And not to say that all female singers are bad. I'm just saying that when you use it as a token or whatever, or you'll have like some jokey gimmick band, or they'll just want to do the same thing over and over again. Like there's very few modern releases that came out in the last few years that I actually enjoyed. One of them was from The Ocean. I think, I'm trying to think actually. Like I remember like doing, like even a month ago, doing a crawl on like these metal labels like Metal Blade, Nuclear Blast. It's like all this stuff just doesn't do it for me anymore. Because it's like, if I wanted to listen to a band that was like Annihilator, I'll just listen to Annihilator. If I wanted to listen to a band that was pretending to be Death, I'm just going to go and listen to Death. So, I mean, the only, like the really small niche ones, like even Seasons of Mist, they're still doing good things. But it just seems that the Redditification of metal, the only real metal genre, I hate to say it, that's immune from this is nu metal. Because nu metal is so chud. It's so pure chud that it can never be Redditified. Now, yes, there is nu metal accounts like on Twitter that are like, you know, they break kayfabe once in a while and they'll post, you know, Reddit opinions, for lack of a better term. But I do think that really, and like I've said before, I said this with Adam Lehrer, I said this with Ace, that the documentary in Woodstock, that really did it for me. That was the era. You know, that was the reign of the chud. That was one of the last times that the working blue collar, predominantly white chud in America could be proud of himself and could embrace a communal, you know, when they say these takes like Woodstock 99 led to Trumpism, like it's like almost you could say, yeah, that's kind of correct in some ways. Because these disaffected youth, they grew up and their future was robbed from them. And they embraced that chud identity, the chud rage that permeated Woodstock. The only time they were all, and even one of these music critics in the Woodstock documentary said that, you know, oh, where did they all go? These young, aggressive white men, they went online. They went to 4chan, you know? It's true. But the only time that the chud came back en masse was under Trump, was that summer of 2016 where he was elected. That campaign, that was incredible. You know, I remember watching all the coverage and it was phenomenal. But I think that, this is why I think people should give a closer look to nu metal again. But anyways, let's move on to the questions. And I do have a long bit about photography and some of my favorite photography artists. And I think I will also talk about a Canadian painter that I quite admired that I haven't, I should have done years ago a Modern Art Madness on. But anyways, one thing I will say that's incredibly crazy to me is the state of exception that follows Orange Man around. The fact that he's like this unique abomination that is, should be expunged. And every time he's mentioned in the mainstream media, he's like, incited this and that. And I'm not going to say it on YouTube, but it's a really incredible. Like, not even Nixon got this. And Nixon really didn't do anything wrong, by the way, but it's insanity. That he's reinstated. It's like they're having this epic fit. The libs are going full DEFCON 5 or 3, or I think isn't 5 the higher one. Anyways, they're going crazy because they're trying to recapitulate this narrative of this uniquely dark time in American history that we should forget forever and only bring out when it's the specter of this evil Austrian painterism in America. It's like, it's insanity. And I think that the culture war that really went nuclear during his era, it's still with us. But it's different than those, halcyon days of the 2010s. It's different. It's something that, it's not like these idiots going out in the streets and, like Steven Crowder and Lauren Southern and all that. It's the Ezra crew, it's something else entirely. The poster is more important now than ever online. It's not these grifters. It's not the faces. The poster has created that energy, has artistically intuited the moment, the frog poster, that they have managed to keep that flame alive. Hence why most people in the base of the GOP, the Republican Party, they know that presenting something as an alternative to Orange Man, that's a psyop. People are aware of that. They're using the language of it. And so you must pay attention to these times because we are in a unique position to pay attention to what's happening. When you look at the way that pop culture dominated things back in the era of nu metal, even like the early 2000s was like the last gasp before the internet took everything over. Nobody cares about the Grammys anymore. Like, unless you're some Stan Twitter nobody. By the way, this take about like all these like meme, like these stale like mainstream meme from like Stan Twitter, K-pop Twitter, Black Twitter. It's like, this stuff was never good. It was never good. It was really the frogs. It was the Heaven site was run by the poster, not these Stan people, not these irony people. No. The poster reigns supreme on the Heaven site. But I'm just rambling right now. But I'm just saying, think of the significance there. Think of it there. Think of the significance of the times that we're living in. But let's move on to the next question. All right. It's funny. I was actually listening to some old Limp Bizkit. They did this set at Lollapalooza last year, and they played like a lot of the older songs like Hot Dog, Rollin'. I remember when Undertaker, that was his theme, eh? By the way, they sleep on that match that Undertaker had with Triple H, with H at WrestleMania 17, because the big one was Stone Cold versus The Rock, obviously. Like, the My Way was the song of WrestleMania. That package, when you watch that package they did of Stone Cold versus The Rock, like Stone Cold grabs his arm and hits, dude, this time I'm gonna come out. Like, oh man, like that. I cried when I saw that on the Heaven site a few months ago. First time I saw it in years. But Undertaker versus Triple H, that was an amazing match. I think it was one of their best out of all the three they had at WrestleManias. but people they don't remember that one, but they remember the one from like WrestleMania. What was it, 28? I haven't watched WWE in like 15 years almost. So I missed all the Cena. I missed most of the Cena era. I missed all of CM Punk and Daniel Bryant. You know, I'm much more of a fan of a Bryan Danielson and Noah and Ring of Honor. But anyways, no, Limp Bizkit. You listen to songs like I'm Broke or Hot Dog, and what else? Yeah, well, Hot Dog's a good example. Like I'm Broke, the chorus, it has a longing to it. It's almost like it almost like they preempted the nostalgia of the millennial in their music, because Limp Bizkit, for whatever you want to say about the lyrics and Fred Durst and how stupid it is, some of those lyrics were terrible, but it's like Limp Bizkit, the formula that they created, like even though it's very formulaic, usually it's like very chuggy, very the way Wes Borland plays is very like chunky. I'm doing the Fantano chunky riffs. No, the way Wes Borland plays is very chug orientated, but the way he does it and the way he'll put in pinch squeals and he'll put in different harmonics and the way that he manipulates his Floyd Rose, and he creates a very whiny sound in some regards. And of course, his massive pedal board that he layers with it. I know I'm talking about nu metal so much in this episode. Yeah, he layers with it. But so the formula being like very chuggy, very hard, very like bass orientated verses, and of course Fred Durst rapping, and then you have an uplifting chorus that will go into a slower, more rhythmic section, more dreamlike, where Wes Borland will use the phaser pedal and delays and so forth, and of course DJ Lethal will usually do the various sound effects and overlayers and turntables on top of that, so the very formulaic, but still there was something within the playing of Wes Borland in particular, the actual root rhythms of it, which has a very like a sense of longing or a sense of like reverie within it, if you will. It's almost like Limp Bizkit knew that they were going to be like the nostalgic band, and like this year and last year, they've sort of like, I think millennials are like the core group now that we're turning approaching our 30s. It's like we were like, oh yeah, this sucked, we hated it, but we secretly did like it, and it's like now it's not cringe anymore. Nostalgia has made it not cringe. So the reason I bring that up though is because this whole thing about nu metal, or Limp Bizkit, is that those songs really kind of were iconic. They were everywhere back in the day. And they really did have a lot of good written parts. And they really did have, like, the slower stuff, like, of course, My Way. Like, I was listening to it, and, like, even the song, like, Hot Dog, the lyrics were... The big attraction was, of course, him saying the F word over and over and over again. But when you actually, like, listen to the lyrics, Fred Durst is lamenting over the plight of like latchkey Gen Xer and older millennial kids. He's really like, it's almost relevant in a way to today. Like he really sort of talked about the atomization of growing up in like North America in a certain generation, and how you're sort of left to your own devices, and all these like kids with issues and broken homes and so forth. And of course, the chorus is ripping off Nine Inch Nails, and that was also a big thing. You would cover, My Generation and other. I think they did a few other covers. But yeah, the point being is that Limp Bizkit truly was iconic. It truly was. But it almost like they preempted the nostalgia that millennials would have for it, because when you do go back to listen to those songs, like listen to the slower parts of I'm Broke, that song. Like, it's very chuggy. It's very much like another wrestling music video type of song, So, but when you listen to the slower parts, you can almost hear it. You could hear that sort of like your quiet desperation, if you will. of like being a broke being a broke dude, and it's almost like the little nuances of sound engineering and soundscaping that probably Wes Borland was the one that put in there. Him and DJ Lethal, probably like the different effects. You could really like hear it. But anyways, moving on. I've talked way too much about metal and new metal in this podcast. So let's move on to the other questions. Before I get to the big photography exposition. So here we go. I think I'm going to have to paywall this other question about Russia. So, that's what I'm talking about Limp Bizkit, because Sneeda Kiss asked me a question about Limp Bizkit. So Chip Guevara, have you read the book Confederacy of Dunces? I believe, is it Chip Guevara, another patron of mine? He has this animated film that he helped make. I'm going to review. Have you read the Confederacy of Dunces? Yeah, I've read bits and pieces. I want to read the whole novel. But, a lot of people have said over the years that I'm basically Ignatius J. O'Reilly. Now, Ignatius J. O'Reilly, sorry, I'm getting confused with Oz, because I recorded this bit on my Patreon episode that I released to the public, though, on this one part of Oz. And, of course, the main character is Kyle O'Reilly. Sorry, Ignatius J. Reilly. Yes, I've read bits and pieces, and I really think that, yeah, he's literally me. He's really like a fat, intelligent guy who wants to be a trad, but he's captivated by modern trash media. And he loves endlessly critiquing the modern world, even though he's intellectually curious by ideas that are, hideous to his Catholic sensibilities. And he, of course, is forced to get a job because he's a neat, typical OG neat incel. And he interacts with freaks every day. Every night. And he, of course, he's in love with the polar opposite. What was her name? Myrna Minkov, where, she would be basically an e-girl. She's like a lib of a particular tribal persuasion. And, he, for some reason, is repulsed by her and wants to, humble her by making her a trad wife. So, yes, Confederacy of Dunces is literally me. Ignatius Reilly is literally me. So, I mentioned Ignatius in, I know if you go to the New Right podcast with Matt Pegas and Dan Baltic, and by the way, buy Dan's book, which also is very similar, and he wrote it that way, to The Adventures of Ignatius Reilly, only a more contemporary example of it, with this, like, trad LARPer, this, like, high, autiste intellectual who thinks that his project is to convert these leftoids, and ends up having a relationship with a fat, woman's march, type of lib, he found on a fetish site. It's called Nutcranker. Go and buy it. Go and buy Nutcranker. It's Terror House Press. Anyways, I talked about Ignatius Reilly on the New Right podcast with both of them, and I believe what sparked that was I mentioned Ignatius, and I want to say either an article or a video about how he's like the model of like the, it was my which I have to get back to, actually, my E-Right series, a confederacy of crap posters, for our YouTube monetization. But I mentioned Ignatius being like the model of like the E-Right and the, E-Girl Alliance, or why we're so fascinated by them, even though we hate them and we drive them out. And, me and Default, we talked about that. If you go to the paywall version of my talk with on Content Minded with Helena Kirchner and Default goes into this insane rant that really is, try hard. I remember she said this one line. She's like, try harder. And it unleashed, a fight or flight response in me. But yes, I have, I'm going to read, I should read the full book when I have time. So thank you, Chip Guevara, a longtime patron. I believe he followed me from the Follow the Rules days. So I'm slowly working my way to the longer part about photography. So yeah, Canadian Dadaism, Canadian Black Pilled. There's a longer one. There's a few longer ones. So, here's one by Sneaky Breaky. Hello, Sneaky Breaky. What are your thoughts on the autumn season? I have some form of seasonal affective disorder, and the start of autumn always seems to make me nervous and bummed. Well, me too, actually. Me too. But to me, it was more, it was the end of the summer to me when I had to go back to school. I was always deathly afraid of change. Maybe that's why I'm such a right-wing reactionary, whatever. Because I was always afraid of change. I hated changing classes. Right up until university, I hated it. You know, I was never excited for it. I always have to, like, dip my toes in it ever since I was a kid. Maybe I do have some form of neurodivergency. I had to, like, always stay to the side of the class or the gym or the playground and sort of, like, observe a little bit, then slowly work my way into something before I felt comfortable. I was always like that. Maybe that's why I have a problem with procrastination. But this is a good question. I love the autumn. I think the autumn is spiritually significant. I like it, as much as when I was a kid, I like snow. And I do like snow. I like the romanticism of snow. It's like to shovel it, though, and always being afraid of tripping and falling, knock on wood. It's an inconvenience. But I like that autumn. I love the autumn because it's like, it's cold, but it's not too unbearable. And there's not a lot of snow. And you're in that mindset of Christmas or Halloween. And last 2 Christmases have been abominable for me personally. Hopefully this year will be very good now that I'm turning 30. But no, I love the autumn. I think the autumn does bring a sort of forebodingness of the winter. There's something very, it's very logical because it's instinctual. If you're someone who's, what is it? Below or above is it below or above the equator? I forget. If you're someone who comes from a colder climate, whose people comes from a colder climate, then, you have that genetic blood memory of like, well, the winter is coming. You have to sort of stock up. You have to make sure that you can survive. Really the rituals around this time is there for a reason, even though I don't totally buy every little aspect of like Evo Psych or like naturalistic explanations. I think that's certainly a part of it. Why there are so many rituals around the winter time. So definitely it's a significant season. It's certainly, I think, probably my favorite season. Although the summer has its own energy, I just don't like the heat, but yeah, I hope that answered your question, Sneaky Beaky. So here we go. That was a great Limp Bizkit question. My God. Billy H. I don't know if I'm doxing him. Billy H. Will you ever do a bookshelf tour? I might do a bookshelf tour, but I have too many books. People have been asking me, but maybe one day. I don't know. It would just be, I don't know if it would be boring for me to just like go to my bookshelves and be like, here's my books and this is what I do and I like this book for this reason. Like, I don't know if that's boring content, but maybe people like that sort of mindless content. So maybe one day I'll do it. Maybe one day. All right, this is an interesting one. This is from Ian S. I'm not going to say it because it may be his real name, but Ian S has followed me for a while. And it is an interesting question. I've not been asked this before. So, for the Q&A, what kind of actions or practices do you do or do not do to steer yourself against the predatory influence of narcissists, both online and IRL? And on that note, have you watched any Sam Vicnin? I've watched a bit of Sam Vicnin. I think I know who you're talking about. Sam Vicnin. He's the psychologist guy. I've seen his videos before. I know he's with this other guy on YouTube. I forget, his name slips my mind. But I've watched a bit of his videos. It's a bit general, but it's kind of entertaining the way he takes a psychologist approach to like a lot of like popular or mainstream events that happen, people and so forth. But I think there really is no strategy apart from just knowing that, again, like all things related to, everything relates back to pro wrestling. You have to know when people are working you, to use a wrestling terminology. You have to know when people are working you. You have to know when people are selling you a bridge, and you have to, I have a bit of experience because, of course, online, you get tons of them. But online, you can sort of, you can take steps to avoid them. Like, for example, Sam Hyde gave this great advice where he's like, you don't deal with them by having this dramatic showdown and confronting them. Like, no, they'll just use that as ammunition against you. What you need to do is sort of slowly cut them out of your life to the point where you ignore them, or they'll go away. Or they will, you have to avoid their attacks. You have to avoid them, like, knowing what you're doing. You have to avoid showing them that it's like, listen, I don't want to hang out with you. You clearly have issues. I don't want to be around you. You have to sort of slowly and slyly recognize that they're basically, again, to use another wrestling terminology, a mark for themselves. And you have to basically always take with a grain of salt the advice that they give you or what they tell you. And then if you determine that they are a turbo narcissist and they can't handle any criticism, then slowly cut them out of your life to the point where you're not bothered by them anymore. That's the best you can hope for. But I know in real life, though, this guy, he's not a bad guy, though. I'm not going to name who it is. It's a person that I've known my whole life. And he used to work for my old man. Oh, maybe I'm saying too much. He's a good guy, though. He's a nice guy. But he's kind of like one of these pathological liar people. He's not he's kind of a narcissist, but not really. Like, he'll tell you a very good story that may or may not be true. You know, these type of people. Like, I don't think he does it maliciously. It's just that you have to, like, always be weary of what he says and what he tells you. And there are certain people, like, here's the thing. I think a lot of people, they get the term sociopath wrong. I think there's levels of sociopathy. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so don't ask me. But I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I'm not giving out medical advice here. But I'm just saying that there are people that are just pathological liars or who are marks for themselves that in the end of the day, they're kind of not really that dangerous to be around. They're sort of just like, they have a high opinion of themselves. They can't help it, in other words. And then there's ones who are genuinely like the negative connotation of sociopath that you must avoid at all costs because they have no feeling towards you and they're not, don't get involved, in other words. So, there's different levels to it. But my advice would just be, so this person, I try to avoid, you got to really be wary and careful of what he says. And, some of his tales are quite interesting. But I've known a few people like this. But when it comes to narcissists, trying to avoid their triggers, what really like sets them off, and trying to like systematically cut them out of your life, that's probably the best advice I can give you. Just know the signs and know what you're dealing with, because a lot of narcissists online and IRL, online it's different because they can hide behind anonymity and they could sort of like talk mad smack about you and they can like start whisper gossip campaigns. But IRL, it works a bit differently, but it's the similar principle. The same principle applies. You're not going to reason with them. Like someone who's a terminal narcissist, you're never going to reason with them because they have an overt love of themselves. That's what it is. It's a love of thyself. They're a mark for themselves. And some narcissists you can sort of deal with, you can work around as long as you flatter them hard enough. But then there are those who are motivated by their narcissism that you can't deal with. Just avoid them at all costs. They're not really worth it. I've noticed that over the years that dealing with narcissists are not really worth it. So that's my advice. Let's take a break and then we'll come back with the photography question. right, we are back. That is, of course, was another piece by Philip Daniel, who will be on the show one day, but end of the year is approaching fast, my God. So this is the big one. I have a huge answer for this one, and then I will cover my thoughts on a few things for the Patreon version of this. I think I'll talk about Girls' Last Tour in relation to Tarkovsky's Stalker, and another question about Russia. So this is by Olorkon, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Olorkon, where he says, what are your takes on photography as an art form? I don't think I've heard or read anything from you on photography. Any favorite photographers, or maybe you hate it? And he has, a laughing face. Thanks and God bless. Well, thank you, Olorkon. Yeah, I'm trying to pronounce his name. Thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question. I had this debate with, my girlfriend, Gifts Again. No, she's not my girlfriend, but a lot of people think that she's my girlfriend. Every time she comes on the show or we interact, immediately the comment section's like, is she your girlfriend, Gio? Maybe one day. No, I'm kidding. But maybe, unless. I had this big spat with, no, it wasn't a spat. It was a friendly debate about the merits of photography, where I said that actually, yes, photography can be construed as an art medium. And let me give you some examples of photographers that I really quite enjoy. And I haven't been given the chance to talk about photography, but here, I guess, is a perfect medium to do it. It's a very complicated question about photography, because I think that photography definitely, as an art form, is never going to be wholly compared to painting or to the performance arts or to music or to literature. But I do think that photography can incorporate elements of poetry, of the juxtaposition of images, and of certain effects. What's that term? Was it pictorialism? Where photographers will use various effects and will actually physically manipulate a photograph to look like they are basically the work of art. And a lot of it is like cheap filter effects nowadays. I think that physical, actual, real artistry when it comes to photography done traditionally is probably the closest you can get as a photographer to the work of art. I think that digital manipulation, it goes in with digital art, and that's something different. And I think that certain elements of photographic manipulation can be artistic in a sense, like Nobody TM, the way that he would, the whole team would put out certain photos that were, heavily manipulated. I equate that with video art. But when it comes to actual art photography, so my opinion is that, yes, to answer your question, I do consider it an art form, and I do have a few favorite photographers that I will talk about. Well, I have a lot. I mean, there's a lot of them for different reasons, and each of them deserve their own exploration, probably their own modern art madness. But I would have to focus on a series or something, or specific photographs. But right off the bat, let me just say that the vast majority of photography art that you get in MFA programs and art school and fine arts, pure crap. Just low effort. It's a prop for activism. It lacks what the Benjamin calls the aura. Walter Benjamin. It lacks the aura, but I think that there's a way that photography can recapture the aura. There's a great book by Roland Barthes that maybe one day I'll talk or write more about, called Camera Lucidia. And he talks about film and photography and pictorialism, but also they're different terms. They slip my mind. But there's a term for depiction within photography, and there's a term for arrangement within photography. But there's always that ambiguity, though, because is photography an extension of performance art, in that you put photographs of a performance in a fine art gallery? Or is the photography itself, is the photograph itself something that is a work of art? Because photography, it's like photojournalism, or what Boris Groys calls art cartography. It's archival in nature. And it's something that is very hard to get a fine art experience from, because either you're documenting world events or a unique moment, or you're using it the way that people like Marina Abramovic, but who the chaotic good of Marina Abramovic would be Anna Mendieta. You know, I think she's like the good version of the non-evil version of Abramovic, who met her unfortunate end at the hands of Carl Andre. So she's also one of my favorite performance artists. I did a whole essay on her. You can find in, I believe, Content Minded Volume 2 on my WordPress. I forget. It may have been there. But, Anna Mendieta, she's one of the greats. But she used photography to archive her performances. But I wanted to talk about certain photographers that I feel are worthy. So I'm going to talk about 3 in particular. Number 1 would be Francisca Woodman, who in some ways is like the goddess of the art girls, the goddess of the photographer, young woman artist. If you had to pick like who art hoes worship, number 1, Frida Kahlo, obviously. Number 2, maybe Georgia O'Keeffe, or like if you're more esoteric, if you're more like minded, you'll pick some kind of like, you'll pick like Marilyn Minter, or who also used photography in her performance, in her like stage pieces, and her film stills series. I can talk about her a little bit, or you'll pick some like BIPOC artist, whatever. Or, or Georgia O'Keeffe. Georgia O'Keeffe would probably be number 2, although I do think Georgia O'Keeffe's a great artist. Maybe Jenny Saville, more contemporary. But in terms of like art hoe of choice pick, would be not Anna Mendieta. Maybe she's up there. Yeah, maybe. But no, Francisca Woodman is like the goddess of the, way before the internet. Not way before, almost in the cusp of the internet. I think she sunsetted in the early 80s, if I recall. She was only like 22 years old, but she had already established herself as really a trailblazer in photography. And the way that she manipulated the films, the way that she would pose her own body, that defied fetishization. But I do feel that her legacy is tainted by the fact that, all these Tumblristas who pretend to be artists taking photos of themselves semi-nude, and maybe there's even like art performance on a TikTok. All of this was basically inspired by her. They still study her in art programs and MFA programs. But no, there was a literary quality to her work. There's other 2 that I think are very important, but in terms of like female embodiment and expression, Francisca Woodman is probably one of the best. She, but unfortunately she suffered the same, like, art girl disease of like, my artwork is a sort of depository of my struggle, the way that Frida Kahlo basically, invented. There are artists that didn't really show their own connection to their own femininity or whatever, or like turned it into like activism. Artists like Lenora Carrington, for instance. I mean, she was a pure surrealist. And yes, you could say that through her fantasy, it was like pro-feminine or whatever. It was much more of a very mysterious, much more chthonic, much less provocative form of surrealism, a very, very high painterly surrealism than the Dali. The Dali is like just macho Chad masculine energy. Like through and through. Salvador Dali is like basically the closest you could get to like a Giga Chad in the work of art in the contemporary age. But, so anyways, there are other ones that, photography always lends itself to activism for a variety of reasons, because it's very matter of fact. It's very much like, especially photojournalism is just rife with like manipulation. But when it comes to the work of fine art, that's still that same capacity for manipulation, that lack of an aura, that sort of the machinations of mechanical reproduction are still there. And, Benjamin, he thought this was a good thing. He thought this was a good thing because it liberates activism and Marxism and the artist. It liberates them from the concerns of the aura and the tyranny of it. And then you can have sort of embodiment of being can come about, like creating life as a work of art. This is Benjamin's messianism. So the second part of that essay, people often neglect. It's because if you're a trad, you're like lamenting. You're like, yeah, art lacks the aura. But then Benjamin's like, no, this is great. This is great because it's like sort of, if you were to compare it to the thesis by Marcuse, that fine art is often escapism from material conditions. But Francisca Woodman, she had a capacity for confronting issues around her own particular, being a young woman with depression and so forth, and her relation to her very ghostly visage and her very her very evanescent sort of style of photography where the body is like half in and half out. And she was very artistic in the way that she would do these mock-ups and with props and in dilapidated buildings. And I like her for some reason. I watched this whole documentary. There's actually a documentary you can find on YouTube on Francisca Woodman. She truly was a trailblazer. But unfortunately, the people that were inspired by her are terrible hacks. And they don't know anything. And they just do it to prop up their own narcissism. And I think that's why my girlfriend Gibson. No, I'm kidding. She's not my girlfriend, okay? But maybe one day. My friend Gibson Given. She. Oh boy, I ruined it. Anyways, this is why she had this big thing. She's like, no, it's just narcissism. She's like, wait, let me do her. Can I even get her accent if I could do it? She's like, no, Gio, it's just narcissism. Like, I'm trying to do her character voice, from the videos. But the computer, you were lying to me. Like, she loves it when I do that. I don't know if she loves. She probably doesn't like it when I mock her like that. But no. Anyways. This was our big disagreement in our episode of Content Minded, the second one, because I feel that photography still has a capacity, and let me demonstrate this to you. I feel that Francisca Woodman, the way that she approached her own subject matter of herself no longer became herself in toto. It became a character, if you will. It became something else. It became something more. And of course, she would put a lot of symbols in it. She had this one series with a bunch of eels, eels being a ancient symbol of fertility and femininity and so forth. And she would prop herself up with them in bowls and so forth. And also, she really focused on distorting the face. There was quite an interesting interiority to her photography. What I mean is that, how like, again, I hate to besmirch her name by mentioning the people that have taken, the women that have taken inspiration from her, that don't have nearly as much creativity or insight. But there was always she was always in houses. She would always take pictures of her and her father and her few friends that she had and so forth. And she would always manipulate her body in a certain way. And she would always use various lengths of exposure to distort features that would become much more easier, few decades later with digital technology. But she really put emphasis on art photography as an art medium. And I wanted to read you an excerpt. This is from a Politico review. What year is this? This has to be... It was from her retrospective. 2012. Oh, my God. 2012. So this is an excerpt. I believe it was from the Guggenheim that exhibited her retrospective. Of course, she sunsetted by, in 1981, I believe. So in the Image After Image, Woodman explores the gaze in all of its multiplicity. There's the male gaze, of course, and its effect on female subjectivity. Laura Mulvey's seminal essay, Visual Pleasure and Cinema. Lauren Mulvey, that essay is, of course, very popular, especially among the feminist literary theory people. It was published in 1975, and its influence, especially in academia and art school circles, was immediate, and Woodman both acknowledges and toys with its implications. A woman is a mirror for a man. In another series dating from 1976 entitled Charlie and the Model, makes use of a male model, a rotund, quasi-comical fellow, posing with a mirror. In the series' final image, Woodman poses behind the kneeling, even cowering Charlie, reversing expectations for male-female power relations. So yeah, she was basically all these, art girls, Francisca Woodman, I'm sorry, did it before you, and did it better than you. So there you go. Throughout, Woodman is interested in such reversals, and her work suggests that female assumption of authority and control of the male provenance of looking is inevitably complicated, even a little dangerous. So she doesn't fully demonize the gaze. She tries to reverse it, but she acknowledges that it's real, and it's something that is ever present in a woman's life, and it's something to explore rather than something just to immediately demonize, at least from my perspective. And it's funny because this article mentions that it is very gothic, her work, and it's something else. It's something else. But like the way that she's appealing to a much older form of femininity that is in a way, it is, negative. She is appealing to it in the sense of, there would be pictures of her with leeches on the floor on like this beautiful Persian rug. And it was very evocative of a lot of those older photographs of women. And it's sort of like very ethereal, very ghostly. Her face is often distorted, or she's looking away from the picture field. And it says something. So here, let me read you the quote. Woodman's pictures are filled with nude female bodies, often her own. These bodies are frequently faceless ones. By the way, one of the greatest songs by Gorguts. Sometimes shown from neck to knee, sometimes flashing anonymous parts. Yeah, there's this one where she has bits of like dried paper, and like the body almost disappears within them. I think they were drywall paper or something. And various photo collage techniques that she would use. Sometimes flashing anonymous parts, as if Woodman is performing a form of blazoning the poetic tradition popularized by Petrarch of praising a woman's beauty by describing parts of her body in isolation. Blazoning. Feminist critiques have long remarked as a form of violence, a surgical gaze. Can't comment on a specific beautiful part of a woman's body. Like, in Songs of Solomon, her mound, right? I can't comment on that. How it's like, what was the quote? That it is like a bundle of wheat with flowers upon it, In her depictions of women's limbs, their torsos and heads seemingly melting with their environments, which are in women's photographs, and more often than not decrepit houses, there's a suggestion of ways in which women's bodies are subsumed by the domestic, separated from themselves by the demands of the world surrounding them. In these photographs, most obviously in the House in the Space series, Woodman literalizes, and in this process satirizes the Victorian trope of the angel in the house. The apparitional woman becoming angels in practice and evoking ghosts and ghouls. And of course in Gothic literature, because there's, I talked about this in the Patreon version of last Solo Variety Mega Show, where I talk about the Duchess of Burgundy, because it's happening, a lot of like Gothic literature is depicted in like these single mansions. It very much is insular. It's very much like the outside world becomes this alien thing, and in the household, it's like this whole Gothic mythology filled with vampiresses and ghosts that are often, metaphors for women who have, segregated themselves from life. There was this one movie, actually. There was this one movie that I think was about Gnosticism. It was this English movie where this shaman Gnostic guy is trying to invoke this ritual for this woman, and they totally isolate themselves for about a month or so. And I think her son was redacted by some school bullies, those vicious, knife gangs they have in England. And she wanted revenge, but then in the end she chose forgiveness. I gotta look it up. It was a great movie. It was really weird though. It was very weird metaphysical indie film cinema. If anyone knows, please comment below. But I have to look it up again. I remember it was specifically Gnostic, but it's sort of like that. Like everything happens within this one mansion, and it creates like this micro mythology onto itself that often has very like fantastical realist or otherworldly tropes. So Woodman's attraction to the Gothic and her interest in Victorian novels has been noted by many an art critic, and these influences are readily seen in many of the displayed works. In the Directing Lightning series, Woodman poses twisted into shapes, wearing a veil, suggesting Miss Havisham, performing the floor portion of her gymnastics routine. Elsewhere, she takes on the fallen woman that violated and put upon Victorian tropes. In Portrait of Repudiation, an early artist book, Woodman stages a progressive tableau in which the smears of paint across her body are finally the only traces left behind. The body vanishes from the final image, like Tess Durbeyfield, the tragic heroine of Hardy's 1891 novel. She tries to hold on to the world only to come undone under the weight of her own beauty and its effects. In other images, she is Bertha Mason, the mad wife locked in the attic. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is usually a metaphor for like domestic incidents. You know what I mean? It's like they become mythologized in Gothic literature. An obstacle and a conduit of female anger, a piercing protest against confinement and stricture. The space she takes from the backdrops are at once open and claustrophobic, and she thrives in them, then breaks free. So yeah, it's very claustrophobic. Even in romantic literature, it's like you would spend one day in one portion of this huge estate, and you'd spend another day in another portion. I remember I had a dream about this once where I was in one of these like Gothic mansions, and there's like a garden pool, and I remember. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, Francisca Woodman is very much taking the medium of photography and depicting particular forms of the feminine within them, and she's doing it very artistically. And I feel that you can really see the impact of literature on her work. So that is why I think she's worthy of note, and that is why I think I respect, despite not exactly jiving with all of the messages, but she does depict domestic life and eating, and like a lot of these tropes that these Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, post-Tumblr art girls, a lot of it like that type of stuff. She was the very first to do this type of stuff. Oftentimes, she was like a femcel almost, in a way. I mean, she had a boyfriend that she broke up with, and that partially led to her sunsetting, apart from being rejected from an art academy. But no, she would like depict herself with trees and branches, and she, very much like Anna Mendieta, nude in various holes that she dug, and she would depict these body parts, around abandoned buildings with her cat and plates of food, and it's very interesting stuff, in my opinion. If you look up the artwork of Francisca Woodman, the one in particular where she's in this it's from the series Portrait of Repudiation, where she is knee deep, like she's sitting naked in like a little gully, what would you call it, like a little creek, and there's this rooted tree that's going down to the water. She's in front of this huge tree, and she does a few series like that where she's like under the branches of the tree, and it's very fascinating. I really like it. And of course, just as a trad alert, like there's a lot of nudies too. There's one in a graveyard where she's nude, on top of the graves. So she's very edgy, and you can see a lot. Put it that way, you can see a lot. And at the time of recording this, I've just discovered that my good friend of mine, Alexander Adams, wrote an essay, a mini essay, a blog post about Francisca Woodman in his WordPress. And, of course, Alexander Adams will be on Content Minded soon. I just have to work out the details with him. And he actually reviewed the series Portrait of Repudiation. And let me read you some of it. So some of the material is unfamiliar to followers of Woodman's art. Some of it's unique and belongs to George Lang, a friend of Woodman's youth. Some of the vintage prints, some poorly printed and cropped, are Woodman's first prints of images since becoming classics, given away in a flush excrement and pride, a flush of excitement and pride. These are teasing and affectionate letters from her to him. Lang preserved material by and about Woodman. The material is exposed in this new book, so forth. There was a photo session at cemeteries involving friends Woodman wore a semi-transparent dress and later undressed for photographs next to graves. The symbolism of the grave is too intrusive and obvious for the series to be effective, but it seems a necessary experiment. Yeah, exactly. They're pretty on the nose about the, nude youth and beauty next to death. That's obviously the hammered home symbolism. An invitation card for an exhibition by Woodman is a photograph of her lying, seen from above, a common Woodman trope of a weightless woman. And, of course, there's pictures of her eating and so forth. And, it's like, again, typical art girl, type of stuff. Contact sheets are reproduced, selected shots illustrated, fully paged. Woman failed to strike a suitable pose. She smiles as she cannot get in position. She moves during an exposure. A shot is not suitably composed and so forth. These are the side products of any photograph session. These are also shots that are blurred and double exposed that did not seem to women suitable for a selection. The material includes letters, postcards, notes by the artist. In her essay, Nora Burnett Abrams dwells upon the issues of sterility and instability of women's photographs, meaning like the serial nature of her work. This seems to overlook Woodman's conventionality, her desire to make great and powerful single photographs. Again, this is what I mean by the work of art. This is what I mean by the photograph becoming the singular entity like the fine art product, in other words. Namely, conceptualism, land art, performance, and inventions within existing environments. These referent contexts are certainly not invalid, and unproductive as points of departure, but the selection by commentators today is most definitely in opposition to the idea Woodman may have been driven to create powerful single images with or without handwritten marginal texts. There's a misstep in discussion of gender in relation to Woodman's photographs. Abbott writes, quote, Woodman does not make her body available for the ease of consumption by a male gaze. I don't know. I beg to differ with that one. I mean, she's pretty good looking. I can't. No, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. The first primary and most important view of Woodman's photographs was Woodman herself. She was an envisager, advisor, creator and model, editor and curator of her own art. Again, so she is an arteur, as you would say in cinema. This is why I think she is a fine artist. She controls every step of production, including the exposure and the final product and the arrangement of photography series. Most important viewers of Woodman's photographs was Woodman herself. Her art was what made to satisfy her own gaze. Her own judgment was the ultimate test of suitability that would determine choices about her art. The consumption of her art was by men and women. It's often women who are far more critical, cruel, and prescriptive about images of female bodies than men are. Well, that's for obvious reasons. Every man, when they look at a naked woman, that's just, it's inevitable. Women's art, so influenced by stories which intertwine myths of men, women, gods, monsters, and animals, is poorly served by such pedestrian commentary. Exactly, 100% Alexander Adams, one of the most basest artists, one of the most basest art critics in the world today. And hopefully, he'll come on, he will come on Content Minded pretty soon, maybe in the new year. So much of Woodman's Gothic, Victorian, anachronistic props and clothing served to distance herself from life of her era. Exactly, you can't tell that she was from the 70s and 80s. She is not Nan Goldin, okay? You want to talk about other fine art women, like photography? She's not Nan Goldin. She's not this activist artist, taking photos of different bodies of different representational groups. And it's like, no, it's none of this crap, okay? She's a woman against time. Francesca, listen, if Gifts and Given will listen to this. I tried to sell her once on Francisca Woodman. Francisca Woodman is a woman against time, okay? Oh, God. if any art critic, any typical academic art critic hears that, they would totally just spin their top at that. So the photographs of her by Lang shows Woodman reflective and playful, though not guileless, a skilled and thoughtful artist, so self-conscious, self-crafted, is never guileless. The photographs of her beside her mother and friends are more intimate than her self-taken nudes. This is the artist as a woman off guard, reacting to stimuli, sharing a joke, trying to amuse a friend or engage in dialogue. Her acting capacity functions as an auteur. Again, there you go. I was right. I didn't even read that part yet. A director and actor is suspended while she is out of her zone of absolute control. The portrait shots of Woodman against a white wall are beautiful. It is strange to think of an iconic presence such as Woodman appearing so unguardingly and in new ways after so many years of us being familiar with a set of groups of her photographs. It makes it seem as though she is alive somewhat, or somewhere, producing material and experimenting with her images and her art. These provisional attempts, failed shots, and discarded art, along with images of her life, make Woodman particularly rematerialized, returning to an ordinary actuality, and dematerialized, alive but absent. I would say that Anna Mendieta is also very similar in her artwork. We see her interacting with friends, colleagues, and so forth. This is pretty much the end of the blog. And this was from 2019 in Alexander Adams' WordPress. So give it up for Alexander Adams. I mean, my God, he is. I am one of Alexander Adams' strongest soldiers. Oh my God, folks, was that 10 out of 10? Was that not 10 out of 10 writing? In my opinion, is. I mean, he's. Apart from a few of other friends of mine, Alexander Adams truly is one of the greatest art critics of our time. So, moving on. This is the second artist that I wanted to talk about. This is much more of a, let's say, contemporary trash Americana. This is John Divola's artistic vandalism. John Divola is quite an interesting artist because he was sort of like an LA-based, you would almost consider his artwork similar to lowbrow comics. In the sense that it's trashy Californian, Salton Sea, and he would go to various places along, Venice Beach and the Salton Sea, and he was in graffiti culture. So it's he crosses the boundary between a graffiti artist taking photos to highlight their work because, they're inevitably going to get buffed out and so forth, and actually taking that and approaching it as a photographer, as a fine artist photographer. So often the graffiti was never they were never about tags. They weren't a specific bubble lettering or tags. They're very much very abstract shapes that he would graffiti an abandoned building. He would graffiti these abandoned little shanty houses along the Salton Sea and elsewhere, and all throughout LA and Southern California, very much trashy Americana. The Zuma series is one of my favorites. This is where he would do these abstract squiggly lines, and you could see the sea out of the window. And he did this around the late 70s, early 80s. And, he truly was a trailblazer in sort of depicting trash Americana. So John Divola, I think, is probably, series like Contingency he did in the late 90s, where he's doing more of interiors, interiors with various furnitures and staging places and so forth. And it's very gothic, very Victorian, very much an attention to space itself. He would take photos of long hallways and so forth. But he's much more known for his series in the 70s and 80s, depicting these trashy houses that are graffiti tagged and so forth along beaches. 3 Acts are the one. Isolated Houses in 2000 is, of course, another very good one. It's where he took that inspiration and he depicted these desert shanty little huts and abandoned houses that were and it very much is just landscape photography. But it's landscape photography that's so good that you just want to paint it. He very much is tapping into the same potential of quietism in the American landscape that you find with Edward Hopper, for instance, in terms of Edward Hopper being a painter and John Divola being a photographer. So let me read you, this is one of the only good Vice art, well, I mean, this is from 2016, so this is just when Vice became, abominable. So let me read you, this is called John Divola's Artistic Vandalism. It's still fresh after 40 years, and this is by Jonathan Blaustein. But back in the early 70s, the artist John Divola began wandering into abandoned houses in his native LA, doing abstract graffiti, then photographing the results. This was the beginning of a long career that saw his work appearing inside most important art institutions in the world, including MoMA, the LA, what is it called? LACMA, LA Center for Modern Art, I believe that's what it's called, and the Art Institute of Chicago. At this moment, his photographs are included in both About Time photography and A Moment of Change in California in the West at the newly reopened SF San Francisco MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. Divola's edgy, discomforting style dates back to the 70s, where he was a graduate student in UCLA. Remember, you gotta realize that graffiti was much older than even hip-hop culture. So, graffiti came first in many ways. The practice was totally of the moment, as UCLA and CalArts were famous for encouraging non-traditional works. So yes, Divola very much is a product of the older system of like CalArts and UCLA. Radical performance art was also hot. Artists shot themselves or, onanist themselves under the floorboards of galleries. In most cases, such works became famous after the fact through documentary photographs. Just up the road on the west side of LA, the Z-Boys were revolutionizing skateboarding. So again, this is like SoCal, Santa Monica type of culture. Moving on. The black and white photographs in his Vandalism series, which he made in these abandoned homes, still feel transgressive today. They also work as pure imagery. Circles emanating out concentrically, dots resolved into patterns, or pyramids. Some of the pictures almost seem to vibrate, like optical illusions. They speak to the history of painting, to street art, to photography. But despite the title of the series, looking back, Divola doesn't seem see a link between what he did in traditional graffiti. No, of course not. This is fine art photography. There's this one image where it's an abandoned house. There's like broken glass and various, those old school window panes that had the meshing in between the glazes of glass. It's like in the corner. And in the corner, he draws like this bullseye. And it's very much like, almost you could say like iconography, how the most important ones in the corner of the room. And then of course he has these trashy abandoned buildings that are like withered by the elements, especially by the salt in the air of the sea, His extensive oeuvre also explores the absurd, as he did in his 90s project Dog Chasing My Car in the Desert, which is exactly what it sounds like. And as far as I can get, also from the 90s, Divola puts his camera on a timer, then runs away as fast as he can. The image is therefore a record of how much ground he can cover. Taken at face value, it's silly and whimsical, yet the symbolism, the desire to race away from one's problems and head towards the sunset, is impossible to miss. Then he talks about Southern California and so forth, and he has like a lot of these abstract, very long, stark contrast between black and white with various fabrics and holes in the wall that he would paint white dots and these figures of humans in black lettering and so forth. And it's very, very evocative. He basically is sort of like, in a way, depicting the process of decay in Americana itself, you could say. He's depicting sort of like for example, there's this one in the middle of, I believe this is from an air base in Georgia, where has like this abandoned building that's got tumbleweed in it. The ceiling is collapsed in, and there's this just black center, this like black vortex hole that he spray painted. And really, it's sort of like, it really depicts Americana in a way that is intimate. And really, when you think of it, he's one of the innovators of urbex, urban exploration, in the way that photography has become so integral to urban exploration, the way that film has. and even urbex artists that are going into these fine art galleries nowadays. And I think that John Divola, he was like the first to do this. Again, he was an innovator, but he had an artistic eye. He didn't just like, because a lot of times urban exploration, you know, I wrote that essay years ago about urban exploration back in the Thermometer magazine days. You can find it in Content Mind in Volume 1. In my WordPress, of course, it's in my link tree down below. And you can see that urban exploration is very much to depict the pure, raw experience. It very much is kind of like an impressionism, you could say. But what John Divola is doing is that not only is he manipulating his environment, but he is taking a sort of mix between that immediacy of the experience of that decaying environment, and he's placing upon it a sort of abstract symbolism that depicts, that seems almost like it belongs there. Because in urban exploration, graffiti is a big part of these abandoned buildings. Graffiti is always inevitable. But when you stage those parameters, when you create an artificiality, an artistic artificiality around them, then there's a potential for photography to not just be a cartography or a documentation or an archival work of these buildings, of urban exploration, of the decay of, America being depicted as a throwaway society, as one sociologist said. I remember hearing that in this YouTube documentary about Gary, Indiana, as a metaphor for the decay of, Rust Belt Middle America. So in a way, he's crossing those limits by manipulating that environment. But it's not your traditional graffiti. It's not bubble letters. It's not throw-ups. It's not like these very complex burner pieces that pretty much are artworks in themselves, even though they are essentially just depicting the artist's name, the tag. But a lot of them, they're basically works of art in themselves. And of course, the reason that it's obvious why abandoned buildings, especially huge factories, are magnets for these type of burner pieces, because the chance of them getting buffed out are next to zero. Well, apart from other graffiti artists, like, marking up them. But the chances of getting buffed out are next to zero. And also you have the time. You're not going to get pinched. If you're careful enough, the cops don't come and see you snooping around these abandoned buildings. You have time to basically do a huge burner piece that is very visually provocative. Same with train yards. Same why, especially cargo trains are very susceptible to these very elaborate burner pieces, or these whole cars, as they say, the lingo. Because, when you're, a lot of the bulls, that's what they call the people that patrol the train yards, a lot of them don't particularly care about cargo trains. So the chances of you getting pinched by a bull is kind of like lower, especially if you know where to go. If you go to like the margins and the edges, I don't know if I'm violating YouTube's rules, but I know a lot of graffiti channels on YouTube, like throw-ups and tags, and I believe Montana Cans has a YouTube channel where they have the Chrome series, where everything's in black and white. Or like black and white and silver. I like, it's very interesting. I very interesting when graffiti artists have to work within limitations of the color scheme that they use. I think that's very interesting. Although I do like those, very complex multicolor throw-ups, Then there's, of course, graffiti artists on YouTube like, I forget a few of them. What's the one guy called Go Something? There's a Canadian channel too. But anyways, moving on. So yeah, Divola was the first to do this. He really was a trailblazer. But he took that inspiration of like urban graffiti culture and like SoCal bum, like lowbrow art, and he took it into the fine art medium. And it's much different because there's an element of staging there. It's much different than if you just are an urban explorer, or if you're a graffiti artist and you're putting that artwork through photography into a fine art gallery. He's consciously doing this. He's consciously doing like land art and so forth. So yeah, moving on. The third artist I wanted to talk about is the Italian landscape photographer Mario Giacomelli. And I discovered his work when I was studying this question I believe there was this like online journal I discovered of Walter Benjamin's work in relation to photography and pictorialism. And Giacomelli, not Giacometti, Giacomelli, not the sculptor, the photographer. He would have these very long exposure and black and white photos that he would physically manipulate, and the landscape is transformed into these abstract patterns and shapes. Oftentimes, they're very stark notan. In Japanese, notan means, black and white. And in a way, it's to disrupt the aspect of the auraless mechanical reproduction that you find in... and I wrote an essay about it. You find in the work of art mechanical reproduction. So it's very much impressionistic work, but he stages it like the lines of a field is very much like the grooves you find in various biological sedentary layers of the skin and of various mitochondria and so forth. It's very evocative of the sort of fractal nature of fractal processes that you find in nature everywhere. And it's very similar to literati painting in a way. In the sense of that one proverb in Taoist literati painting. I forget who said it. I forget which exact painter said it. That it's like a single brushstroke can simulate a vast landscape of a tree line or a hill or a mountaintop or something. You very much get this vibe of minimalism, of sort of the breathing of the landscape, what you would call wu wei, letting be, or room making. It's very much a room making type of thing. And I wrote an essay that I'll probably release, but it's like I was stopped like almost when I was done. This was back in the WordPress days. I think I wrote this back in like 2019 or 2020. And I talked about how he reproduced the image, how he would physically manipulate them. The landscape becomes deterritorialized, and it really breaks with, ostensibly the photograph as a medium of something that is lacking of an aura. It's pure reproduction. But with him, it becomes something more. The landscape is transformed. The landscape is almost something... the only painter you could compare it to would be John Virtue from England, who comes like the closest in the contemporary fine art world, like the post-young British artist world in Europe and, in the UK, to something like the Taoists, like literati painting, like the Chinese ink painting, where he only uses black and white. He only uses acrylic and black shellac, and these vast works on huge canvases of like the contemporary London landscape, the Thames, the various buildings and so forth. And here, what Giacomelli does is something. He takes photography and he makes them highly aestheticized. So here, there's one essay I quoted where it says about, Walter Benjamin in photography. As Benjamin tells us, it chooses its angle at will. The selection of camera angles and lenses and its technical manipulations through enlargement and slow motion does not correspond to the natural vision of the naked eye. The process of technical reproducibility introduces a crisis in perception. After standardization of natural habits by the media, the correspondence to the changing with humanity's entire mode of existence within a realization that nothing is natural about our lives, our memories, our past. And so I think what Giacomelli does is that he uses photography to break this, because he's recognizing that the photography and photographic technology is an artificial lens. It's an artificiality inherently. And the fact that our minds, don't think, we don't really think any longer in terms of mythic being, in terms of narrativization that comes from mythos, which is largely from poetry and oral traditions and so forth. Even in Europe, you have the Iliad And, you have the Peloponnesian War. What else am I thinking of? I mean, of course, you have the sagas in the north. You have the Ennead, very much akin to approximations of oral traditions, in the global south as well, here in North America, the indigenous. But, we don't really think in terms of that mythic time anymore. We think, and this is where Deleuze was correct, we think in cinematic time. We think in terms of the image, in terms of not just the image, but the moving image, film, photography, so forth. And pictures deliver you that spark of virtual time memory, that Proust talks about in Search of Lost Time. But now it's a glimpse into that moment, like when you look at an old photograph of yourself. What Giacomelli is doing is that he's delivering the same artistic expression of painting into photography, because he recognizes that it's an artificiality. And people that claim that photography is like super organic, like, yeah, most photography is just basically taking a photo of real life. But the way it's depicted, the decision you make as a photographer to capture a certain field, the editing that you do, it's not really organic. It's not the way that the human eye is seeing. Like the Impressionist painters were trying to deliver you sight that is immediately, in a way, deeply experiential to the artist, but also capturing that moment that the unconscious eye is seeing that is beyond the artist. And the artist makes decisions about light and color temperature and hue. Because here's the thing, most color choices are really just choices of tonality. The tone of the colors. Hence why using a limited palette is so important. Because color harmony is not achieved by, yes, it can be achieved by color schemes. If there's like a particular flavor of blue that you're using or a limited palette. But a limited palette will give you a pretty good sense of like focusing on temperature. And not just temperature, but on tone. Tone is the most important. Not necessarily the colors that you're using. And the Impressionists, they knew this as well. So when it comes to photography, Giacomelli, among most artists, like over most photography artists, he's recognizing this and he's transforming the landscape through photography into something approximating the work of art. And the way he does this is by viewing the landscape as a natural process that ultimately is marked by the human eye and by the very technology that you're using. And so he very much uses the techniques of photography and actually manipulating the film and blotting out certain portions and features of the landscape the way that an Impressionist painter would blot out certain features of the landscape or predicate more worth on this particular focal point or another, or why when you compare paintings of a particular landscape, why you would say, oh, well, that tree wasn't there at the time or that building wasn't there, because they're editing. All art is editing at the end of the day. And so he takes us further. So that's why, let me see what I wrote here. I say that this is what Benjamin calls the optical unconscious, bringing forth a second nature order of lens camera over the eye, expressing a natural vitality to look at reality through the camera. Not to look at reality itself, but to recognize that you're using an apparatus that is made by the sort of comportment of man, the behavior and activity and ingenuity of man. And this opens up a very funny and interesting liminality between what we think is real and our memories of a photograph or a film making it real rather than the reality of it. It opens up an ambiguity. This is why, photography really did contribute to the age of postmodernism like nothing else. Because with painting, you recognize that it's a mock-up of the real. Even an Impressionist can't claim 100% that they're capturing that scene in its totality. Photography does claim that, but photography can never escape from the fact that it is an artifice, it's an apparatus of an artificiality. It is tainted by the hands of man. You know what I mean? Like, it's not your eye. The eye is creating a depth of field and focusing on things, and there is, a hook, it's being hooked up to the phenomenological experience of engaging a particular subject or daily life. You have memories, you have sort of spatial awareness that is not there. A photograph cannot give you these things. So Giacomelli is saying that, photography cannot give you these things, but it can give you something that's approximating the mood and the temperament of a painting or a drawing. So that's why it's very fascinating. And maybe I'll work on this essay and I'll release it someday. But I have some other questions on the Patreon portion, and I want to talk about two works of great cinema. One is an anime, and one is, of course, a Tarkovsky film, and how they relate to each other in the Patreon portion. So thank you. I will see you there. God bless everyone. And go to my Patreon, patreon.com/GenerProductions, to get the full... I have some spicier questions there, too, that I will answer.